Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Change of landscapes outside the window, kaleidoscope of new faces, communication with a variety of people. This is the ride on a long-distance train. That's why a lot of people love traveling the road. But for Emily, it's a job. She is a conductor on such a train. And for her, the road is a separation from her young son, taking care of passengers and troubles. Sometimes problems, sleep deprivation, but pleasure too. Of course, the clatter of wheels sometimes brought sad thoughts about her son. She longed, thinking how he was growing up without her. Where to go if you could not get a good education because of early marriage? A decent job, close to home cannot find. From the marriage left only a son and pennies alimony. I have to live on something, as there is no one to rely on. The only soulmate is Trixie's sister, but she has enough problems of her own. So most of the help is moral. So I went to the railroad. It's a good salary, and you can always work part-time. And the work is interesting, not so hard. It's not like her mom had to lay ties. That was work. So the poor woman didn't live long enough to reach 50. And the work of a conductor is nothing compared to that. And problems, well, there are problems everywhere. That's what work is. Where can you go without it? In general, their whole family was connected with the railroad. Father was a machinist, too, all over the country. So he was rarely seen at home. Mother also considered her marriage a failure, whether there is a husband or not. But my sisters loved my father. His arrival was always a holiday, but he left early too. In fact, the failed marriage, of course, had done a lot of blood to Emily Tighe, and everything else was forgivable. But the fact that the house, which his own grandmother Emily bequeathed to Emily, sued, that's what he seriously failed. I mean, she thought she was going to have a place to live. And not just a house, but a plot of land with a vegetable garden and outbuildings. How much effort she put into it. How she loved this house and her grandmother and mother-in-law. God rest her soul, before her death she said, "I bequeath everything to you, Emily, to you and your Johnny. That bastard Greg won't get anything. He'll be wasted anyway. He's such a piece of junk. He's just like his father. You'd better chase him off while you're young. You'd need a good man, and you'd be all right." And so she did, writing a will for Emily soon after the death of Greg, whom she had long suspected of cheating, in the same house, and caught Emily with his mistress. So I decided to fulfill my grandmother's wishes. Break up. I could kick him out. But he didn't. He went with some documents and certificates to shake, to prove that his grandmother, Annie Igorovna, was not in her last years, and Emily, almost with a knife to her throat, forced her grandmother to write such a will. That was my own grandmother, my late mother's mother. It is clear that she wanted to leave me the house, and this snake, while I was at work, abused my grandmother, so she forced her. And how much effort and money have I put into this house? My ex-wife only knows how to walk, so now Emily and her son had to rent an apartment, and that too without work and part-time jobs nowhere. And there was no hope to save up for some housing of their own, because you have to pay for rent and hire a nanny to look after your son while she was on a trip, not to mention the fact that you have to live on something. That's the way it is. On the next voyage, she immediately sensed that there would be trouble. At the station, a pregnant woman entered the carriage and her husband saw her off. You look, as if something did not happen, she thought unhappily, seeing how the woman's husband drags and places the luggage. In parting, he admonished his wife. "Here you go, Stacy, a separate compartment. You'll have a smooth ride. Call me as soon as you get there. Say hello to everyone for me. And here are the presents, remember what's for whom. And call me right away, don't forget." And he didn't forget to address Emily. "My wife is pregnant, as you can see. Please, please be careful. I don't know what's going on. I'll be very grateful." And he slipped a few bills into his pocket. "Thank you for that, of course. But it's the fact that Johnny's sending him out with a belly like that and no escort. He realizes that anything can happen, but he says, 'Go on, dear. Say hello. And in case of what happens, who's to blame? The conductor. They'll remember that you paid for it. Oh, those men, you put your treasure in the car and goodbye and goodbye. And if you reproach them, they'll make big eyes saying, 'What's the big deal? They used to give birth in the fields. You should try it yourself, at least in the field, at least in the forest.'" Emily thought unhappily, remembering and passing the courses of guides. But what courses were there? Just a few classes, one of which talked about first aid and childbirth, but few people listened. Everyone laughed more. And the teacher herself reassured, such cases are very rare. Besides, There is bound to be at least one doctor or nurse in your carriage or in a neighboring one, so let's hope that everything will be all right for you. Let's hope so, Emily decided. The train touched down, rolling along. She looked in on a particular passenger, offered coffee or tea, asked how she was doing and feeling. "Don't worry, everything is fine. I don't need anything yet," the woman smiled. The face was indeed calm. Nothing portended trouble. Emily, having calmed down, went about her business. But could one cause for concern be dismissed? The next station added to the strangeness. Emily saw an elderly man trying to board the train. He tried one carriage, no luck, and then he got to her. Not only was he without a ticket, but he was blind. Well, you can't let the blind go without an escort. It's like everyone's conspiring today. Pregnant or disabled, she thought. Clothed, obviously not very well, but clearly not a vagrant. A clean, pleasant face, about 60 years old. "I didn't have time to take a ticket, but I have money. I'll pay," he asked. "Why are you alone?" Emily asked. "I don't have anyone to escort me. I haven't had time to hire anyone either." She couldn't refuse, so she let him in. And only then did she gasp. No seats. In one compartment there were, but there was a mother with 3 children, where they could not take another one, and even a blind one. The other compartments are not the same. Her partner took her aside. "What are you doing, Emily? It's not enough that you have one pregnant woman who's about to give birth. You let this one in too." It was such a quiet flight. No drunks, no company. But no, you're just going to get in with your mercy. What if there's an inspection? Come on, if anything, blame it on me. I can't throw such a man off the train. And what a weather. Look, it's starting to rain again. Don't we have no conscience at all? How can an already unfortunate man freeze on the platform? But she quickly realized that the pregnant woman was traveling alone in the compartment, and here Grandpa is quiet, clean, calm, will sit in a corner. He can't see anything, but he won't be noticed. "Let's go," she took him by the elbow. "I'll make you comfortable." "What station are you going to?" "Who are you going to?" Grandpa named the destination, said that he was going to go on to his son. "Why doesn't he see you off?" Emily wondered. "I'll meet you there," the passenger sighed. "What's your name?" "Archie. You can just call me Uncle Erich," he grinned. His face was tense, suggesting he was blind as a result of some misfortune, not born that way. Emily peeked into the compartment at the pregnant woman. "Hello again. Ellen, sorry. I didn't recognize your middle name." "It should just be Ellen. What's the middle name?" The passenger smiled again. "I'm fine. Don't worry. The deadline hasn't come up yet. It's just that I have 2. So much for the big belly." Emily sighed to herself, but spoke of something else. "I'm sorry, Ellen, we have this thing." And she explained the problem of a blind grandfather who simply had no place to put him. "Why don't you take Archie as your traveling companion?" Ellen was even nicer than she seemed. "Yeah, sure, let him go. Do I mind? I don't think we'll be in each other's way. That's how well it all came together. They'll both get there without a problem. Matthew shouldn't worry. Grandpa's really nice. You can see he's intelligent. White, clean hands, thin fingers. Maybe he's a musician. They say blind people have good hearing, but I don't know what happened to him. It's not Emily's job to figure it out. The main thing is that she didn't take the sin on her soul, didn't leave the unfortunate man in trouble at the station. She would have suffered herself if she had refused. Everything was really quiet from then on, and in general in the carriage, and in the compartment where there were passengers, inspiring anxiety. Emily looked in on them, offered tea and snacks, but the lady had all her own, and the blind passenger politely refused everything, and indeed sat on the edge of the bunk, like a shadow. "So at least have some sweet tea. Why sit like this?" "All right, I won't refuse tea," he replied, but that was the end of all his requests. There were no stops during the night, no problems or accidents either. And Emily was about to decide that she could take a nap when some frightened girl knocked on the compartment door. "Oh, do you have a connection here?" "There is an uncle, blind, says that an ambulance is needed, or at least a doctor. Something's happened there. I didn't realize it was water." Emily had just realized what the water was. She found her partner, told him to radio the trainmaster and announce that a doctor was needed, and she herself rushed into the compartment to the pregnant woman and the blind man, inwardly lamenting, "Oh, the problem is hard. You have to go to the station. You can't wait. She'll give birth. I wish there was a doctor or someone else." And the compartment moaned, clutching the corner of the pillows with her teeth. Ellen Archie soothed her. "Don't be nervous. It doesn't happen that fast. Help will come. The main thing is to calm down and listen to me. Uncle Erich, I still have 2 weeks to walk. It hurts. Help. She looked hopefully at the guide who looked in. It's all right. They'll make an announcement now, find a doctor, and everything will be fine. How are you doing here? Are you having contractions or something? Yes, but I'm afraid we won't get to the station. A quick labor, the man said softly, soothingly. And in the meantime, get what you need ready. Clean underwear of some sort. There's a first aid kit, isn't there? I've got everything. I'll get it all right away. Emily marveled at Archie's calm, confident tone. He sounded like an experienced doctor might give orders, even if he'd been a professor 3 times before. What's the use of that now? The poor guy can't see, she thought, as she took what she needed. She returned to the compartment, where things, by all appearances, were already going to labor. Now someone will come, she said confusedly, as she watched Archie's sensitive hands examine the laboring woman. Well, while we wait, you, Emily, sanitize your hands for both you and me. Not everyone here wants to wait, he said sternly, surprising the conductor again. Open up, it's coming soon, alone on his feet. And how do you know? Are you a doctor? Asked the astonished Emily. Yes, I used to be a surgeon, but I used to deliver babies too. Still had eyes though. Let's try it blind. You'll have to be my eyes and hands. Oh, Mommy. I don't know how to do anything. Emily was afraid, but she pulled herself together so she could do it. The main thing is to listen to me. There was no doctor or anyone related to medicine in the whole train. And Emily, on shaky legs and drenched in sweat, had to deliver a baby for the first time in her life, and not a simple one. It was multi-layered. Later, Annie herself could not remember what and how she did, but there were 2 new people in the compartment, boys alive and well and screaming loudly. They were placed on the chest and belly of their mother, who in a joyful voice, forgetting pain and fear, began to give thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much. Emily, crying loudly and laughing with happiness and relief, sat down next to her, holding the babies. She loved them so much, as if she had given birth to them herself. It's you 2 who are my saviors. I would have died without you. 2 badger boys, I would have given them your names. No, you wouldn't. A boy could be Emily too. So there will be Archie and Emily, the mother said in a weak, happy voice. Oh, what am I if it hadn't been for Uncle Erich? I couldn't have done it. I had no idea what to do, Emily sobbed. You're a good boy, Archie. Your eyes don't see, but your hands remember everything. You must have been a good doctor. It's been a long time, the man sighed, also wiping away a tear. The door to the compartment opened ajar. The second conductor, without going in, asked, well, what's up there? Everybody's alive. Who was born? Alive. We have 2 boys. Come in and see, Emily replied. Come on, what's there to see? I was afraid to pick mine up anyway. I just came by to tell you we're pulling into the station and there's an ambulance waiting. They'll take you to the hospital right away. I won't forget you. And my husband will thank you. I'll tell everyone how you saved me and my children. Helen hurried away. Here's my cell phone. Don't lose it. Give me yours too. Don't worry. We're interested in how your boys will grow up, too, Emily assured her. The young mother and her children were dropped off at the station and taken to the maternity hospital. Emily gathered Archie into her compartment and poured tea. Yes, and adventures on the road, she said. And really, if it hadn't been for you, it would have been a disaster for Ellen and her boys. As it is, they are all alive and well. God willing, they will grow up to be good people. We'll be here soon. I live in the same town. Will your son meet you? I want to meet him at the cemetery. He's dead. We had an accident. He's gone. I went blind. I wish I had died right away, too, the passenger replied, pounding his fist on his knee. Oh, that's how it is. Well, if you had died, 3 more could have died today. But you see, you're alive, so you're needed. You survived here for a reason. Since we're going to the same city, my flight's ending. I'll take you to the cemetery. Okay? Don't you have any family at all? Emily felt sorry for this elderly and apparently very nice man in such a difficult situation. That's the thing. No one. I used to be fine. Now I wasn't just a good doctor. I had my own clinic. I was making money. I did something stupid. I married a young woman. My wife is Wolin's mother. Our son died a long time ago, and then this happened to us. Volin was gone. I was between life and death for a long time, and then it turned out I wouldn't be able to see anymore. And while I was in that state, Yuji took over the clinic, and somehow she turned it around so that she turned all the people against me. Don't ask. I don't know how. So now all I have left is my son's grave. So I went to see him. And then, well, yes, there are people there, maybe Archie said calmly, as if he'd been through something long ago. What's the matter with you? I don't know what you're up to, but you can't do that. Emily didn't know how to comfort her new acquaintance, but she realized that he was really going through a hard time. Why don't you stay at my place for a while? Go to the cemetery, stay a while, and then we'll see. We still need to know how ours are doing. Their mom's good, Vincent, and it's good that she met you. You'd make a good medic, by the way. And don't worry, I'm not going to end my life. At least not in a way that's going to upset or scare or set anyone up. I don't listen to what I'm saying. Once in town, Emily took Archie to her place, introduced him to her son, and soon they were driving to the cemetery. On the way, he talked about Voland, who also became a doctor, worked in the clinic of his father, and gave great hopes. What a pity. He probably would have saved a lot of lives, too, Emily sighed. Yes, he followed in my footsteps, but the path was shorter, and the worst thing is that in his personal life, I think he repeated my failures in many ways, Archie sighed. He didn't get married in time, though something was going to happen, and even more than once. He wasn't young anymore, but he was secretive. I only introduced him to my first girl. It was right after high school. My mother and I were against early marriage, but they didn't really want to be together without us. They split up. I don't know why. It was the same for me. I split up with my first sweetheart, with my wife Voland's mom. I lived like that, out of obligation, for my son's sake, and so that I wouldn't be alone. Then she died, and I got involved with that old fool Eugenie, and I was alone. That's what I should do. The cemetery, of course. Emily helped Archie find the grave. She led him to a bench. I'll be out of your way. You sit here and talk to him, and I'll be right over here. When you get up, we'll go, she said. Thank you, Vincent. What would I do without you? I don't know, Archie answered. Emily stepped back and wandered between the graves, reading the inscriptions on the monuments and wiping away tears. She felt sorry for the lonely old man. Pity for those who lay beneath the ground, and for those who left inscriptions on the stone to testify to their grief. Glancing from time to time at Archie's slumped form, she suddenly noticed that a boy, small like her son, was coming up behind him. Well, that is, about 6 or 7 years old. In his hands he held an inexpensive bunch of artificial flowers. The man must have heard his footsteps and looked back. Emily also hurriedly approached and heard the conversation. Who is here? Grandfather asked. No, I'm Erich, said the boy. I just came to visit the grave. That's right. That's my dad. Who's that? Archie put his hand on the monument. Yeah, that's what my mom told me. We used to come here together. Can't you see it at all? Did you come to see him too? The little boy asked with childish curiosity. I am his daddy. Where is your mom, and who is she? What's her name? My mom's name is Maggie, but she's in jail now, and I was in an orphanage and escaped. And since you're my daddy's daddy, that makes you my grandfather. Why don't you take me out of the orphanage? I can live with you and help you. Tears were ringing in the child's voice. Emily, her heart breaking with pity at the scene, came closer and asked, What's going on here, Vincent? I don't know. I think I found my grandson Archie, replied Maggie. Yeah, I remember my son had a girl like that, but I never saw her. All I heard was them talking on the phone. And then I don't know what happens next. I don't know how to make sense of it all. Is it really true? What am I supposed to do with all this? Archie was confused. Emily was, too. She shifted her gaze from the boy to the photograph of the dead young man and saw that there was a resemblance, but it would be premature to draw any conclusions from that alone. And anyway, what could be done with all this? So, well, friends, let's go home and tell each other all about it. And I'm getting a little cold standing here, too. You're not dressed for the weather, Erich, said Emily. I ran away from the orphanage in the summer. They didn't give me a jacket then, the boy said cheerfully. Was it that bad in the orphanage? Did they insult you? Everyone cares about you. Now you'd stay warm and go to school, Emily wondered. It's bad. I don't want to live there. I don't go to school, I can't go. I already know a lot, and I can count as much as I want, and read, and in general. But I don't want to go to the orphanage. It's disgusting. Erich frowned and turned the conversation away. Grandfather, how do you go if you can't see? Well, I do not sit all day. I have a cane, see? I know where I can step, and where I shouldn't. And now Aunt Emily's still around. Aunt Emily doesn't have enough to worry about. Now she's got you. Emily thought, who really had little idea how she would be with her grandfather and grandson. She has to go on trips. And where would those go? The boy to the orphanage, so he'll run away again. The grandfather, even if it is possible to prove that they are related people. The guardianship, of course, will not give. He himself needs a guardian. In short, she takes on an impossible burden, but at least a few days will stay. She'll dress them up. She has extra clothes. The boy seemed to guess her thoughts, and as they approached the house, he tugged at her sleeve. "Aunt Emily, will you help me and Grandpa? I'd like to live with him." "I'll try, buddy. I just don't know what I can do," she said. Archie understood her concern, too. He sighed heavily, realizing that there was little he could do to help a lonely woman with a lot of problems of her own. At home, Emily introduced the boys, sat the guests at the table, fed them. She listened to the guest's story about being an orphan. "My mom and I had a good life. I'm telling you the truth. We had a nice apartment. I even had my own room, and my mom had her own. She worked and got money, and we had everything. And then some people came. My mom said they were liars. They took the apartment and said something about my mom, that she was a criminal. So they took her away. And when we said goodbye, she promised she'd come back, and that I'd wait for her. She also told me not to believe she was a criminal. That's it." "And when was that, Erich?" Emily asked. "I don't remember much. I was 4 years old, and now I'm 6. "So you remember your daddy then?" Archie asked. "Not well. He used to come over and give us toys, and then my mom told me he was dead. We used to go to the cemetery with her." I remembered. Yes, the boy's memory was not bad, but in legal matters, what could he understand even now, even 2 years ago? Emily sighed heavily. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this. Do you remember your address?" "Erich, I would go there. Ask something. How?" "Oh, there's no point," Archie replied. "The new owners must have the apartment. That's all it is, black realtors. I should know better than to know I'd been ripped off by one of those guys. Maggie, too. I don't know why Wolin never told me anything about her and her son. Only Maggie herself can tell me that the old man pondered. You'll get my mom out of jail. It's really not her fault." Honestly, tears welled up in Erich's eyes. "We understand." Baby Emily stroked his head. "I'm going to go look at the apartment, see if I can find out anything from the neighbors." "I think we should go to other people," Archie said firmly. "Ellen, this is the woman who gave birth. She said she was grateful that her husband would always help her. I don't like to ask for gratitude, and I don't like to demand gratitude for services rendered, but this is a special case." "Do you think there's anything he can do to help?" Emily asked. "I have no idea. But we don't even know what kind of person he is, where he works. Maybe just a rich businessman. But we don't need the money. Well, maybe he's influential in some areas. Can he at least help us find out how Maggie got locked up and what happened to the apartment? Or at least tell us who to go to? Is there anything we can do on our own? What are we now? We're nobody." "So, do you still have the phone numbers Ellen gave you?" "All right, let's call her, tell her what our problems are." Emily dialed Ellen's number, but the phone was silent. Well, obviously she's still in the hospital with 2 babies. No conversation at all. Only in the evening did she manage to contact her casual acquaintance, on whom she had pinned so much hope, only to be completely disappointed. "It's okay," Ellen said in a sad, downcast tone. "The kids are fine. So am I, but I'm thinking of divorcing my husband." "Why? Why all of a sudden? I thought things were going well between you two." "Oh, it wasn't fine. Is it good when a husband sends his pregnant wife on a train? I've been thinking about it here at the hospital. Why did he do that? Didn't he realize that I might die? That the children might not survive? Lucky you and Archie were there. What if I hadn't? Is that what you think now? Is he sitting next to me, begging for forgiveness or something? No, he hasn't even been here once. He's got things to do, you see. So I told him, mind your own business and I'll mind my own." And she cried. "But why so wide open?" Emily tried to reason with her. "There must be an explanation for everything." "He has a million explanations, but it doesn't make me feel any better. And anyway, we had a fight. I told him I was going to name the kids after you, and he didn't want to do it. He said he wanted to name them after our fathers, Igor and Victor. And he said it was wrong to name a boy after a girl. She's probably right about that. Archie has a grandson named Erich after him. Maybe they'll name a granddaughter after me. I can't fight with my husband over something like that."
Yes, you laugh, but Ellen was very serious and was not going to make up with her husband.
so it was even awkward to address her with her requests in such a case. Well then, that hope is gone, Emily realized. Since this husband was no longer in Ellen's life, he was hardly going to help us. And why should he? It's not like it's just some sum of money. The next day, seeing no other way out, she went to the address that Erich had given her, to his former apartment. Emily didn't know what she wanted to find there. Emily just wanted to look into the eyes of the people who had taken away the only place to live from a single mother and her son, and who were probably responsible for her imprisonment. She hoped to learn at least some details that might help with Maggie's release. After all, if she had to ask for help from powerful people, it was better to know the ins and outs of the case. Should I talk to the neighbors or something? She thought. But what she found out was completely unexpected. The door to the apartment was opened at her call by none other than Greg, her ex-husband. "Emily? Is this where you found me?" he said with a mocking smile. "What do you want from me now? Is the alimony too low again? Or what? What are you doing in this apartment? How did you get in here?" "I got here the right way. I walked in the door, and now this is my apartment. I sold my grandmother's house. You know, I don't want to be in the garden. Now I'm a city dweller. What do you want from me? I need to know how you got this apartment. You took the house from me and my son, and now another woman has it, and you put her in jail. How did you do it? Why do you want to know?" As an exchange of experience, tired of serving tea and coffee to passengers and dirty laundry for the third time to sell people, her ex-husband continued to mock her. This and the other woman should not flap their ears. Think about themselves and their child. Now let her sit, think. And a little such is not harmful. I may be tired of being a conductor, but I've never framed other people, and I never will. And I didn't set you up. But it wouldn't hurt to bring her out in the open. Remember that. Emily turned around and left, not really knowing how she could fulfill her threat. Of course, you could report it to the police, but while they're sorting it out. With such sad news, Emily went home, thinking about what to do next, and on whom she would leave the blind grandfather and his little grandson, while she herself will be on a voyage. If she asked for a nanny, she'd ask for twice as much money, which she didn't have. And if she called Trixie's sister, she'd probably refuse to do her own thing, too. There was still hope that Archie would think of something. After all, he hadn't always just been a blind invalid. He'd worked in a clinic once, probably saved someone's life. He must have had some acquaintances who may have heard some bad things about him, but they'd still remember him as someone who'd helped. But she had no time to tell the news at home. As soon as Emily entered the room, there was a phone call from Ellen this time. She was much more cheerful. "Emily, hello. Excuse me, please. You called last time, probably to say something, and I started complaining to you instead. But you're not angry, are you?" "Of course I'm not angry, Eleonora, but I understand your problems have been solved. You and your husband are reconciled," Emily rejoiced. "We have. He explained everything to me. Turns out he was building a house, and he decided to finish it completely so that I and the children could move there from the maternity hospital. So now we're in a new house. You could call it a palace. Vincent's with me right now. He'll talk to you. He wants to thank you and Archie too. He's with you. Yeah, our doctor's here. There's a man on the phone. Hello. Emily, this is Vincent Timofeyevich. Can I call you Vincent? I'm the husband. Ellen told me everything. I can't tell you how grateful I am. The doctors at the hospital said it went exceptionally well. Even they couldn't have done better. You have really good hands, and that Archie too."
"Oh no. We couldn't leave a woman without help, but all the credit goes to him. He's the doctor. I'm just an assistant. He told me what to do, and I listened to him," Emily explained.
"And you did a wonderful job helping my babies come into the world. Thank you so much. I'd really like to meet you both and see if there's anything you need. You know, you can't let something like that go unappreciated. I was just calling. I'm sorry. But that's exactly why," Emily said, struggling to find the words. "You see, we need help, not money, not material help. I'd like to ask if there are any good lawyers among your acquaintances. Maybe lawyers or, I don't know, someone else, because Archie and his grandson are in serious trouble. Of course, I'll find you any kind of professional help you need, free of charge. I don't worry about that," Ellen's husband assured her seriously. "But it is necessary to meet to find out more about what is bothering you." Emily gave her address and told him when she could be at home. "And Archie's staying with me now, too, so we're all here. Oh, and my wife told me she wanted to name the kids after you. And don't even think about it. What's the big deal? Don't worry about it. I think Ellen's changed her mind, too." Vincent arrived the same evening with a lawyer. He listened to the whole story of both the boy and Archie. Apparently, the boy's mother was victimized by the same con artist we've been looking for. Now we'll have something to go on. Don't worry, they'll be held accountable for what they've done. I just wish we could figure out why Maggie went to juvie. I don't think she really did anything wrong. We'll figure that out too. Once we've started, we've got to keep going. Don't worry. It's a complicated case, but we'll solve it because there are plenty of victims out there. You're saying your ex-husband was involved? The lawyer was asking around. He was. He also took away the house from me and my son, which our grandmother bequeathed to us. It was obviously illegal, but I couldn't prove anything. I don't know enough, and I don't have any connections. And he brought in some man, apparently with an education. So my son and I were left without a roof over our heads. By the way, my son needs to go to school and to the clinic. Do not worry. Everything will be done according to the law, said the lawyer. And the case began. An additional investigation was launched into why a woman with a young child had her apartment taken away and why she had been convicted. And this time the law was on the side of the deceived. Emily's ex-husband was on trial. Of course, the house could not be returned. It has long been sold, but she was able to get the money for it. But Erich and his mom got their apartment back. And Maggie herself was also released from prison. After a review of the case, it turned out that her accusation was completely false, and soon the happy mother was already hugging her son and thanking Emily and her father-in-law. How could it be, Maggie? Archie asked. And why didn't I know anything about you or Erich? Volin and I had a fight. It was a silly excuse, of course, but it couldn't be helped. It was a big fight, so we broke up. It was my fault, too. I loved him, but I couldn't help myself. I was so worried about it. And then I found out that Wolin had died. But even then, it was too late to contact you. Besides, I was embarrassed. You were a serious man then, a rich owner of a clinic. I had no education, no profession. I thought I'd come to you after Volin's death and you'd just kick me out. You'd think I was some kind of fraud, but I'm not. The son is really his. I almost left Erich an orphan because of some stupidity. Archie said reproachfully. What's wrong with your arm? He gently felt his sister-in-law's elbow. Yes, I worked at a sawmill in prison. I made a big mess of it. At first I thought it was nothing and there was no one to treat it, but when I turned to them, they said it would be fine. Anyway, my arm doesn't hurt much. It just can't bend all the way, she said. Probably surgery can be done and everything will not be so difficult, said the former doctor. I don't really care about my arm or anything else. The main thing is that I'm home, that Erich is with me, and we have a place to live. Maybe you'll move in with us. Please, Archie. You're the closest thing we have to family now. Oh, this is awkward. There's not much choice, though, Grandpa said. There's nowhere to live. All I have left after my wife's shenanigans is a room in a communal apartment. It's almost impossible to live there. The neighbors won't let me. And isn't your lawyer, who solved my case so cleverly, will not help? How can you be so traumatized and left with nothing? I don't know, Maggie. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. That's the last thing on my mind today. I'm happy. I've got my grandson, I've got you. And if you can find a corner in your apartment, that'd be great. And I won't be redundant. That's for sure. I think I'll find a job, and you'll be very useful to us. Look after my grandson. Look, Archie grinned. Oh, I'm sorry, it's just a habit. At least you'll be around. It's like a child without supervision. Well, Maggie was embarrassed. Erich and I are real friends now, Archie reassured her.
And with us, too, with me and Gianni, Emily reminded him.
We're not blood relatives, but we're not strangers to each other. And you, Maggie, if you're looking for a job, why don't you come to us as a conductor? We need people all the time. It's not the easiest job in the world, but it's good money. I'd love to. I've been in this damn prison so much. It'd do me good to travel now. That's good, of course. But I tell you, Emily, you'd make a great medic, said Archie. Oh, I wouldn't be a medic. Not unless you're always there to tell me what to do. But in general, I listen to you. I read books on first aid. I don't have time to learn much, but in case of emergency, I won't sit idly by when someone helps me with something. I can do a lot of things myself. Things happen on the road. But before Maggie could get a job, she had to sort out her hand. She was referred for surgery. But it was more complicated than first thought. She stayed in the hospital a little longer than she expected. Emily visited her, and one day, to her amazement, saw on the nightstand a picture of her father next to a woman and a little girl on his lap. Who were those people? She asked. Where did you get that picture? How could I? It's me as a little girl. Didn't you recognize me? Those are my parents, Maggie replied. They're dead now, but I always carry the picture with me. That can't be. That's my father, Emily exclaimed. And when you were born, it turned out there wasn't that much difference in their ages. Maggie had always lived in this town. Emily grew up in the country. I have an older sister, Trixie, also his daughter. I don't see how it could be that he's yours and ours, Emily wondered. It's very simple, I think, said Maggie. He worked on the railroad and traveled all the time. He must have been staying at your place or ours for 2 families. It happens. Yeah, I'll say. That's our daddy, and I never knew it. My mom must have known. I've heard them fight about it. Sometimes Emily remembered. Well, you see, mine used to resent him for coming so seldom and for being away so long. I wonder, Maggie wondered. So suddenly it turned out that they really are sisters by father. Maggie met Trixie, her husband and 2 children, so it was quite a family. Meanwhile, the fate of Archie and Erich was decided. They were able to prove their kinship, and the grandfather settled Lucy at his failed daughter-in-law. Nor was the acquaintance of Helen and Vincent and their sons Vidi and Gorko, with whose help they came into the world, interrupted. It was interesting to watch the little ones grow up. The mutual appreciation of the adults made it hard to forget each other. Maggie recovered, got a job as a conductor, and they began to travel together with Emily. They became real sisters, and when they finished their business, often told each other about their fates. They both had much to share. They also had something to complain to their family. Maggie had never had any sisters, and Emily and Trixie didn't see each other as often as they would have liked in their spare time. Emily had finished her home nursing course, after all, and was now considered prepared for the unexpected that could happen on the road. On one of the flights, a company of businessmen became passengers. Emily didn't like it right away. Always with this public, some kind of trouble happens. They complain about something without any reason, or demand something. I guess they compare the train to their own office. But what can you do? You can't just drop them off. This time it was not without difficulties. At first the businessmen behaved quite calmly, young and decent people. It is obvious that they are well-to-do and not in need of anything. They refused tea and closed themselves in their compartment, solving some questions. Suddenly one of them burst into the compartment of the conductor. Girl, I need a doctor urgently. Do you have any doctors on the train? There's a man in there feeling bad, suffocating. I don't know. We'll have to make an announcement. What's wrong? Emily asked. Who cares what? You're not a doctor, are you? The passenger became indignant. I'm not a doctor, but I can administer first aid. She firmly pushed the petitioner away. Taking the first aid kit, she hurried to his compartment. They'll call a doctor right away. Don't worry. I don't know what's wrong with him. He drank some medicine, suddenly entering the compartment. Emily noticed the serious swelling on the young man's face and quickly realized everything. An anaphylactic shock. An allergy, apparently. What's the drug? Where did he get it? She asked, preparing a syringe.
Wherever he needed it, where he got it, the doctor found it. What are you going to inject him with? I'm telling you to call an ambulance, scandalized the victim's companion.
Please calm down. My partner has already called everyone, and I know what to do. Emily quickly administered an injection and gave the injured man the necessary first aid. The passenger was rescued and regained consciousness rather quickly. Thank you, Savior, he said as he shook Emily's hand. That's a little something like that. I'll pay you for it, and I'll pay you back too. Chuck, you're the one who slipped me this. He turned to his partner.
What did I slip you? You took something yourself. I don't know if you can or can't. You like to blame others.
Yeah, the story was almost criminal. His partner, a competitor of the businessman, gave him headache medicine that he couldn't take. What did he know? Well, he also knew that an allergic reaction can kill you, and that might well have happened if Emily hadn't been there. Thank you. You just saved me. The injured man shook her hand. So are you a doctor too, or what? No, I'm a conductor, but I graduated from nursing school, so I know roughly what happened to you. It's no big deal, really. It's really good that I happened to be around, Emily said, putting the medication away. You just see your doctor. He'll help you out. I don't think you'll need anything else, though. I know, it's happened to me before. Allergies are a scary thing, really, and the one who triggered it, Chuck, you might say is a companion, but really a competitor. Apparently that's how he wants to eliminate me. Can you give a reference as to what caused all this to happen? The man asked.
How can I give it if I'm not a doctor? Emily replied. I can testify, of course. Are you going to sue him, though?
I don't know yet. I actually want to break up with him. I mean, kick him out before some more serious trouble happens, although it wouldn't hurt to punish him for that sort of thing. It's a hell of a way to go. I don't want to get involved, of course, but it wouldn't hurt to tell everyone what Chuck's done. Let everyone be careful with him. Well, that's right. I won't argue. People like that are generally best kept away. They talk some more. Emily noticed that the passenger's condition had stabilized and went about her business. When the businessman was getting ready to get off at his station, he approached her again, bade her farewell, offered her money for her help, but she, of course, declined, and even felt a little hurt by such an offer. Although she liked this young man, she did not think at all that their acquaintance would continue. For the next few days, she was thoughtful and distracted, and Maggie, who worked with her, was even surprised. "I don't recognize you. Always so cheerful, so active. And now you're walking around like you're in the water," her sister told her. "I don't know what's wrong with me. You know, after Greg and I broke up, I didn't really pay much attention to anyone. Well, it's not like I'm still in love with the ex. No, it's not. I even hate him after the shit Jennifer did to us. But I don't really like or trust other men either. I don't even like these road trips. They don't do any good. I've seen all sorts of things. You know, there are such conductors, and among ours, too, who on every voyage choose some man and imagine it's love. I'll never do that," Emily tried to explain her mood. "And I'm not going to either. And anyway, you have to separate work and personal life. Otherwise, take our father, for example. How do we know if he only lied to our moms or if he lied somewhere else along the way? There are families with kids. I just don't understand what you're saying." "Did you fall in love with someone?" Maggie wondered. "Oh, I don't know myself. There's this guy, but I can't figure out what it is. I think about him all the time. And he got off at his station, and that's all. I don't even know where he lives, if I can meet him. Well, at least a glimpse of him. And so sad about it," Emily admitted. "But I'm definitely in love." "But that's a good thing, Vincent. I'd love to be in love too, but I just can't seem to do it," Maggie sighed. Strangely enough, as she finished her shift and stepped off the train, Emily saw Hercule with a bouquet of flowers. He noticed her too and walked over. "Found out when you were finishing work and thought I'd meet you and thank you." "You don't have to. Thank you for the beautiful flowers, though. It's been a while since anyone's given them." Emily brightened. "You're not married?" "No, divorced, and I have a child." "He's 6, admitted Emily, who had no intention of hiding anything. "You must be very tired. Hurry home to your son. I won't keep you, but I'll walk you home, and let's meet tomorrow. I'll invite you to a restaurant or anywhere else you want to go." It was obvious that he was a little shy, but he spoke sincerely. "You know, I'd really like to go out. I don't really care where, as long as it's just for a walk. Maybe just down the street," Emily suddenly blurted out, determined not to be modest this time. It was not, of course, a confession of affection, but still, maybe he would realize that he had not left her indifferent. Hercule seemed to guess it, for he was glad of it. He accompanied Emily home, and they made arrangements for tomorrow's meeting, and she was welcomed home by a happy, bored Kieran, who had his own plans for tomorrow with his mom. "I so wish you weren't going anywhere already," said the son. "Why don't you get some other job so you can leave in the morning and always come in the evening, like all moms do? I'm bored without you." "I'll try," buddy. Emily kissed him, who also wanted to find another place. It was so hard for her to leave her son alone for long periods of time. "I'll definitely think about it. Will you let me go tomorrow night? I have a little business there. I'd really like to get away for a while." Again, the son was upset. "But it's not enough that you're gone all day long. You're going to leave in the evening. I could hardly wait. I have so much to tell you. Why don't you take me with you?" Emily was upset too. She realized she was depriving her child of her own company, and that was a bad thing. But what could she do? She wanted to see Hercule. In the evening, she called Maggie and told her about the date for tomorrow. Her sister was delighted. "There, I told you you'd be together. Vincent, it's fate. It's their destiny. But I guess I'll have to call him now and turn him down. Kieran misses me so much. He wants to be with me. I can't abandon the baby for my love life. It's not right. Don't you agree?" "Did you tell your beau that you have a son? Then you could have arranged it so that you all go to some playground together or something else. The child would feel good, and so would you." "Oh, I don't know if Hercule would agree. He wants to meet me and I want to meet the baby." "That's not right either," Emily hesitated. "You know, if his intentions are serious, it won't scare him. And if he just wants to have fun, why would you want to do that?" "Well, or invite him over to your house. Then spend time all together, and he'll see how you live, what kind of hostess you are." You know, you're probably right. I'm going to call him and tell him I can't leave my son, Emily said firmly. And so she did. She called, apologized, and explained that she and her son missed each other too much and couldn't bear to part ways. Maybe some other time, she suggested gently, afraid that Hercule would hang up now. But he took it with complete understanding. Yes, of course. Somehow I hadn't thought of that. Would you like to keep me company? The three of us could go out. I think there's a nice kids' cafe in the neighborhood. Emily was ready to dance with joy. She had never expected to find such an understanding and kind man who was willing to spend time not only with her, but also with her child. Of course we'd love to, she said. That day of the first date went just fine. All three were happy and had no doubt that their meeting would not be their last. Hercule seemed to be quite serious. He himself had brought up the idea that it would be a good idea for Emily to learn another profession so that she wouldn't have to go far and long. I don't know yet. I'm really not good at anything else after all, and I'm not educated. I've only got courses in conductors and nursing, and with courses they won't take me very far, she explained. Why not? You've got to find out first. Maybe it's all quite real. To work as a nurse, let's say, just in the treatment room, you do bandages, right? You give shots too. He saved me, Hercule was saying. But maybe, if only, so she answered doubtfully. All relatives and acquaintances supported her. Maggie, who had grown tired of the romance of long-distance travel rather quickly, was also not against it. Honestly, it's not for us. This job is not for moms. We'll be constantly on the road. We won't notice how our sons will grow up. And it's good if they grow up right, in the sense of good people. You know what happens to kids who are left unsupervised. Erich communicates with street children and says that it is not the best company, and many become such not because the parents died or for some other serious reasons. A lot of them have a mom and a dad. They just don't have time for kids, so they just hang around doing nothing. I'm thinking of going to school too, but of course not to study medicine, but something else. Maybe an accountant, Maggie reasoned. Emily and Hercule's relationship was developing. The young man had already become his own not only in her house, but also got acquainted with all her family. He was already perceived by everyone as a fiancé. Relations with Jennifer, he had a great relationship, and the matter was steadily moving towards the wedding. On the engagement of the whole family was invited to the restaurant. In front of everyone, Hercule handed her favorite bouquet, put on her finger ring, and asked to become his wife. The consent was met with applause. How I envy you, said Maggie. I want a love story like that too. Shall I travel some more? I'll meet my fate too. Actually, Maggie had already finished her accounting courses, and she'd been accepted for an internship with the company. She decided that a sedentary lifestyle was preferable for her with a child and a blind grandfather, so the words about continuing to travel were more of a joke, and her sister assured her that fate would find her at home. And so it happened that very evening in the restaurant. One of Hercule's friends noticed Maggie and asked her to dance, then on a date, and soon between them also began a relationship that led to the wedding, which occurred 6 months after the marriage of Hercule and Emily. Emily was not only a guest, but also a witness. Everyone said pregnant witness at the wedding. A guarantee of a strong family, and Emily had been expecting her second child for 6 months. Carol Johnson shook her head silently as she sat visiting her neighbor at a modest table with cookies and a mug of tea. Emily only soothed her 1-year-old son Michael, and afterward Sam cried as well. The children were only 7 months old and had already lost their father and their mother, the sole breadwinner of the large family. At 25, Emily was left alone with 3 little ones who happened to be born on the same day and year. You're my everything, John often said to his wife during his lifetime. If you only knew how happy I am. You're all my wealth, and raise them all up, Emily whispered, afraid to wake the children. Lily was always the first to start crying, and then her brothers would start crying. John worked as a trucker, often away from home for weeks at a time, but he was an excellent husband and a caring father, tried for his loved ones, worked hard to ensure that his family did not need anything. Now Emily could only remember the embrace of her beloved husband. His voice and involvement in a terrible accident 4 months ago took John's life. No one believed it could have happened. At the time, the only person by Emily's side was an elderly neighbor who came to the rescue and helped her with the little ones. I understand, dear. I lost my husband early myself. We didn't even get to have babies. Carol Johnson stroked Emily's hair as she cried on her shoulder. But you have 3 of them. You have to manage somehow. Do you even have anything to live on? Well, John and I have been saving for a new place to live, Emily shared, wiping her face from her tears. We're living on those savings for now, and then there's the unknown. How am I going to look after them and work with them? I don't understand. Carol was silent at first, pondering the thought. Then she suggested I could look after your kids. You get a job first, and then you can put them in daycare. Really? Emily was confused, not expecting such a generous offer. Carol Johnson, can you do that? There are 3 of them, after all. And they roar amicably at every opportunity. I can do it. You just try to get a job somewhere fast. Thank you so much. Emily thanked her roommate profusely, hugging her tightly. I've already looked at one option, a private firm. No, you better find a government agency. It's all legal there. I heard that our civil registry office needs cleaners. What's not a part-time job for a young mom? Emily realized she had no choice. Who would hire her, an orphan, for a good position? She didn't know much about anything. How hard was it without John? It seemed like fate was testing her on purpose. The apartment, issued by the state after adulthood, required repairs, which consisted not only in finishing the walls, but in replacing the windows and other things. The old wooden frames let in a draft. Emily had to push rags into the cracks and tape them shut to keep her fidgeters from catching cold. Emily successfully interviewed for the receptionist position and started work. She even felt a little proud of herself because it was her first official job. Before she'd married John, she'd only worked part-time, and then he insisted she could support her family on her own. That's why I say women need to think with their heads and get an education so they don't have to mop, said Nellie, a member of the wedding palace staff, and nodded toward Emily. Her co-workers were eating lunch during their break and were watching the new girls work with an arrogant look. I wouldn't wish such a fate, Faith thought, and sipped her coffee from a paper cup at the coffee shop next door. It's a nightmare in cube. How does she imagine raising them on her meager salary? Emily overheard her co-workers talking by ear. It turns out that everyone in the registry office was already aware of her situation. After all, the details of their boss, Sarah Williams, did not keep secret. I'll manage somehow, the indefatigable optimist Emily answered them with a smile. Do I have a choice? I wouldn't get excited if I were you, Nellie replied with a startled look. Emily realized she didn't fit in with these well-groomed, independent women in expensive business suits who witnessed the birth of families and their collapse on a daily basis. She didn't want to argue with them or make enemies. After all, she needed this job, but she wasn't going to let herself be ridiculed either. Everyone has their own happiness. Do you find it in your job and status? I find it in my children. Oh, like you had a choice. Wake up, Faith glanced over at her friend. Emily was tired at work, on her feet all day, keeping the ceremonial halls and office corridors clean, going unnoticed by the rest of the staff. She was required to be quiet and brisk, which Emily successfully coped with. But she couldn't rest at home. She had to fuss with the little ones, apologizing for leaving them with a stranger. Carol Johnson, how are you? She asked. Tired badly in my lower back too. I'm not going to lie. The kids are exhausting, but I'm not giving up my help. So you should at least disguise the bags under your eyes, Emily advised Nellie, not really caring to be tactful. I'm a mom after all. And how can you hide them? Perhaps Emily hadn't realized how important people were in their marriages. You ought to look decent, even if that awful uniform doesn't make you look good. My appearance is quite pleasing, and it did not prevent Sarah Williams from hiring me. Now please let me pass. I'm afraid I'll splash water on your fancy shoes. Emily warned them and picked up the bucket. She couldn't understand why the 2 registry clerks found amusement in discussing her in front of everyone, and not even embarrassing herself. What was it that displeased them so much? Why are they sticking their noses into other people's business, happy, pleased with themselves? They acted like their own lives weren't that interesting. Emily had been working for over 2 months, and even though she tolerated the bullying comments of insufferable co-workers, she was making her own money to support her family, even though she was disadvantaging herself in many ways. She didn't yet know what Vera and Nellie had prepared for her before the wedding of the daughter of a banker, whose name was not an idle one in their town. Emily had just scrubbed the reception hall with white columns decorated with fresh flowers. "If Sarah Williams notices we splashed water on the tiles, she'll kill us," the girlfriends giggled, anticipating the spectacle. But the supervisor was too busy attending to the bride and groom, who were anxiously awaiting the moment of the signing. Emily had never seen such a lavish wedding before. Jessica looked like a princess in her white lush gown. Ryan looked just as good next to her in a dark suit of expensive fabric. Tall, handsome, with eyes in love. Only around his fiancée's parents he felt constrained. They thought that Jessica was making a big mistake, linking her life with this commoner. That's what Patricia Stevens, the future mother-in-law, called him. The newlyweds were approaching Vera, who greeted them with a cordial smile and prepared to make a touching speech. She was a little nervous and hoped to make a good impression on those gathered, but no one noticed. The broken vase. And Ryan was on the floor faster than anyone could pick him up. "Oh my God, love." Jessica bent toward him, despite the lush skirts getting in the way. "Get him up quickly. He could have been injured." "What on earth is going on at your registry office?" "It's a mess." Patricia Stevens spoke imperiously. "Who is responsible for this mess? I beg you will forgive us." "Oh," Sarah Williams ran up to them. "In Ryan's suit? We're about to call an ambulance." Emily froze in horror. She couldn't be seen behind the thick curtains, leading into the corridor of the staff room. She was always supposed to be around to clean up emergencies and not ruin the young one's party. But where did the water come from? She had cleaned the hall 15 minutes before the next guests arrived. It was clean, no streaks or drips. Emily looked at the pale Vera and guessed who was behind the incident. She didn't seem to realize what she and her friend had been up to. "This is a terrible oversight," Vera's mind was spinning. "We can stop it all." "No need, it's fine," Ryan assured everyone, rubbing the bruised back of his head. "Nothing is going to stop me from marrying my sweetheart today." Jessica smiled dazzlingly and kissed her fiancé before the registry office staff asked for it. Someone in the crowd of guests whistled deafeningly, and the atmosphere diffused. "Let's get on with it," Patricia Stevens commanded. The rest of the ceremony followed the usual script. Sarah Williams apologized to the rich family for a few more minutes, and then found Emily. Already from afar, she threw lightning bolts at her with a look. "Are you trying to get us all sued?" "Explain this immediately," Sarah Williams demanded. "I checked everything beforehand." "I would never." "I don't need your inane excuses. Don't you realize how much trouble we're going to be in now? You get out of here immediately and don't expect me to be responsible for you. Look, this is set up on purpose. I take responsibility for my duties." But Sarah Williams wouldn't listen to anything. She was so angry that there was no way Nellie and Vera would have confessed to what they had done. To keep her job, Emily couldn't convince her bosses. She packed her things and went home. Earlier in the transportation, large tears. She felt devastated. There was so much on her plate that Emily didn't know what to worry about first. Now she was once again left with her babies, realizing that she was giving them her full attention and realizing that they were the most coveted employees in any office. After all, she didn't even have a completed education. The "do not worry, you will find a place where you will be appreciated," encouraged Carol Johnson neighbor. But Emily found that hard to believe. Even after talking on the phone, they wouldn't take her anywhere. The Human Resources Department thought that the mother of 3 children will constantly ask for sick leave, because for her kids will always be in the first place. On another afternoon walk with a wide stroller for her Lily, Sam, and Michael, Emily noticed a familiar face in the square by the fountain. It was no longer in operation in October, but people still circled around the beautiful structure. Emily stopped, determined not to be seen by the man she recognized as Ryan. But he noticed her and rose from his seat. "Don't run away. I don't hold a grudge against you," he pronounced as he quickly caught up to Emily. "I heard you were fired after that incident. My mother-in-law said it several times during the banquet. Like that's something to be proud of. That incident was worth more than just getting fired. What if you had been seriously injured?" Emily replied, lowering her head. "Only it wasn't my fault. I'm just the scapegoat." The conversation took on a life of its own. Emily didn't even notice Ryan Gumilev sleep in the fresh air of the kids, coaxing her to sit down with him. Patricia Stevens is cruel to anyone she doesn't consider family. And I'm no exception, he shared. "I don't know by what miracle Jessica and I got married in the first place." Her parents were furious, but Jessica wasn't used to settling for less. "I'm sorry, but you don't look like a happy family man," Emily observed. "I know for myself. Ryan laughed at first, but decided to open up nonetheless. I come from an ordinary family that will never achieve the status and wealth that my wife's parents have. My feelings for her are genuine. You see, I love her very much. She loves me. That's the only reason we got married. I don't need their connections, their money. I just want to be with the woman I love. And Patricia Stevens is doing everything she can to tear us apart. Now I'm thinking more and more that I made a mistake marrying Jessica. The conditions I've been put under are so unbearable. I'm treated worse than a servant. It's like I'm nothing. And Jessica reveals a whole new side to me. She's bossy, capricious. She can go to extremes. I don't know how I'm supposed to live with people like that. What's there to advise? Emily sighed. What kind of counselor was she? When she herself was mired in poverty and trouble. You can't mess with people like that. They're not used to being disobeyed if they think they're beneath them. Perhaps you can talk to your wife and convince her to live apart from her family. After all, she already chose you once, becoming your spouse. So she sees your future together. You're right, Ryan smiled sadly. I've bored you with my worries. I'm sorry. I'm not the one to complain to you. I don't know how you stand it. It's scary, isn't it? But it's worth it for the kids. You're the whole world to them. Emily felt relieved to talk to someone who didn't know her and John, who was in the same predicament. Ryan excused himself briefly for a hot coffee before returning and turning the conversation in a more positive direction. They both needed the friend they had found in each other. If only for a short time, but neither Emily nor Ryan suspected that their sweet conversation had gone unnoticed. Claire, Jessica's paternal aunt, had immediately called Patricia Stevens as soon as she saw her son-in-law leaving the registry office. You have no idea what a picture I'm witnessing right now, Claire informed her. What do you mean? Patricia clarified. You like to beat around the bush. Tell me. Save me some time. Please. Our precious son-in-law is now strolling around in the company of the very cleaning lady who almost killed him at the registry office. No way. What are they doing? Where are they now? Patricia Stevens was immediately interested, wanting to smear Ryan in her daughter's eyes and break up the young couple. No matter how hard she tried to accomplish that before Jessica's wedding, she wouldn't listen to her. She knew her mother was scheming and let her attempts pass her ears. Nothing out of the ordinary. Talking in the public garden, drinking coffee. Sounds like a friendly meeting. Only what could they possibly have in common? Thank you, dear. Patricia smiled into the receiver. You really helped me out a lot. Even though she'd gotten the chance to turn Ryan's meeting with Emily inside out, she felt resentful that her son-in-law had chosen some simpleton over her daughter. But that was right up his alley. It was nice that he realized it himself. Patricia Stevens' mind was seriously occupied with plans to upset her daughter's marriage. When Ryan got home, he was on his usual behavior, trying not to antagonize his mother-in-law. And how did you spend your day off? Jessica inquired in a level voice. Had a restful vacation. The city is beautiful this time of year, Ryan replied briefly. Just took a walk through the fallen leaves. He decided not to talk about his meeting with Emily. He knew how outraged Patricia Stevens had been after the incident at the registry office, so he could have added to his new acquaintance's problems. But she found it odd that Ryan hadn't said a word about the meeting. What was his connection to that girl? What would make him meet her without telling anyone? Patricia Stevens decided to play on the fact that her son-in-law was a compassionate man. She contacted Sarah Williams and got Emily's phone number and address from her. Again, I apologize. It was my fault for allowing such a clumsy employee to work. Sarah spoke in a sweet voice, trying to butter Patricia up so she would have no more complaints about their facility. Don't worry, I realize how often there are bad employees. In my day, I had to work hard to rid our firm of her kind. I have no complaints about you. Don't worry. Patricia asked the maid for her cell phone and sent Ryan a message. Ryan, hi, it's Emily. Please come see me tomorrow, I need help. I have no one else to turn to. You're my last hope. Patricia Stevens watched with no small amount of amusement as Ryan scurried off after breakfast to attend to some urgent business. A friend asked for help. Remember that Alex guy? The one who was a witness at our wedding, he explained as he was about to leave. Jessica walked over to her spouse and kissed him, stroking his stomachs. Are your friends more important to you than your wife? She asked. Don't worry, honey. Ryan kissed her back. You won't have time to miss me. Ryan didn't realize how he could help Emily, but he couldn't stay away. In a way, he felt guilty in front of her for his new family's behavior. After all, he hadn't been hurt. Accidents happen every day. No one is immune to it. But his family had clung to the poor cleaning lady, so no one would think it was okay to treat them so disrespectfully. Ryan easily made his way into the entryway and rang the bell of the correct apartment. The address was listed in the text message. "Ryan?" Emily asked, confused, pulling her long house robe tighter. "What are you doing here?" "You're the one who asked for my help." The man was perplexed. "Look." He showed her the text of the message, but it did nothing to clear things up. "This must be someone's joke. It's not like we exchanged numbers," Emily said. "And I wouldn't bother you with my own problems. So I came for nothing." "Not for nothing. You're just in time for breakfast." Emily opened the door. "Come on in if you have time. I have rice porridge and cottage cheese pancakes, store-bought only." Ryan, sympathizing with Emily and her living conditions, thought if he hadn't worked at Jessica's firm, he might have found a good position for her. Only Patricia Stevens wasn't likely to be happy with her after all. "Careful," Ryan mumbled softly, helping up little Sam, who was hovering around the table with his brother. While Lily sat on her mom's lap, Emily smiled tiredly as always. "They don't let me eat in peace." At this time, Patricia moved on to the next part of her plan. She was alone with Jessica and began in a soft voice. "Listen, daughter, your Ryan isn't at a friend's house right now. He's at another woman's." "What do you mean?" "Aren't you tired of picking on him yet?" She replied in a tired tone. "I don't have time for that right now. I want to rest. And I want a good husband for you. Do you think I'm lying?" "I have proof of it, but you have to come with me." And Emily was surprised at the unexpected ringing of the doorbell. For the second time that day, she wasn't expecting guests, and Carol Johnson always knocked on doors so as not to wake sleeping babies. Patricia Stevens flew into the apartment, pushed Emily aside, and headed straight for her stunned son-in-law, who rose from his seat. "What are you doing here?" Jessica asked. "Shut up," Patricia commanded. "So this is the friend you go to in the evenings?" "Jessica, what did I tell you about?" "What are you talking about?" "I'm just here visiting," Ryan tried to explain himself. "What, are you cheating on me with her?" Directing a furious glare at husband, Jessica shouted. "Stop it right now. You're scaring my children." Emily squatted down, cradling the 3 toddlers who were staring at 2 loud, disgruntled women who smelled too pungent. "I'm going to call the police now if you keep this up." "And you shut up in the first place. You found someone to scare with the police. Be thankful your kids are stopping me from pulling out all your hair," Patricia snarled. "Yeah, no, nothing between us. I just happened to be here by accident," Ryan tried to prove a point. "He got a message." Emily tried to confirm his version of events, but Patricia Stevens didn't let him finish. "I've always been against this marriage. I told you he was no match for you. You don't have to come home, and you can find your stuff in a dumpster," Jessica raged. "And forget about the baby. I'd rather he grow up without a father than with someone who swore he loved me and now sits in this brothel." Emily didn't interfere anymore. Patricia and Jessica left the apartment on their own. It was clear to them that they weren't going to discuss any other options with Ryan. He was out of the family in an instant. "I'm sorry," was all Emily said, and Ryan continued to stand in a stupor. "I'm sorry about that." He knelt down in front of the frightened children and tried to humor them. Apparently he was in shock since he didn't comment on what had happened. He had not yet realized that he had lost his family and child in an instant. Everyone was silent for a few minutes, and then Ryan stood up and headed for the door. "I need some air," he said. Ryan hoped that Jessica would cool down and agree to hear him out. This was all about Patricia Stevens. She'd definitely set the whole thing up, and now she'd sink her teeth into her version of events to turn his daughter against him. Ryan wandered around town, knowing it was too soon to go to Jessica with his explanation. It was starting to get dark outside when he got a call from Emily. They had managed to exchange contacts before his wife and mother-in-law showed up at her apartment. "You can stay at my place if you have nowhere else to go," Emily offered, genuinely wanting to help. She knew how important other people's input was in critical situations. "Thank you, and I guess I have to agree. I have friends here, but I'm still hoping to reconcile with Jessica, and I'll have to explain why we're having a rift." "Then don't be shy. Come over and I'll make dinner," Emily promised, and Ryan hung up the phone. Even though he was still worried about the future of his marriage, he He was glad there were still people who were sympathetic. Ryan stayed with them for a few days. He tried to be helpful to repay Emily for her kindness, so he'd taken care of the kids. "I got fired," he said, sighing as he looked at the text message that came on his phone. "There's definitely nothing to hope for now. If my mother-in-law is trying to cut me out of every aspect of my life, then there's no way I'm getting Jessica back. But you only saw her once. Try again," Emily said in a pathetic tone. "Keep her in the house so she doesn't run into you. But she'll see you standing under the windows." "I'm starting to be overcome with doubt that she herself never really needed to marry me," Ryan shared. "I mean, we're having a baby, and it's mine. Is it okay to tear things up like that when I wasn't caught cheating? Is everything either black or white with her?" And Emily didn't know what to say. She let Ryan talk because it made him feel a little better. There was nothing he could do in this situation. "We need to get a job. I can't abuse your kindness." "Good idea. I can't feed all of you. Besides, it's time for me to get settled. I can't pay my rent with air." A week later, Ryan went to work as an apprentice cathedral master. He'd never done this kind of work before, but he was determined to gain experience so he'd never have to depend on the bosses or meet Jessica's family. Ryan kept waiting for disaster to strike. He was sure that Patricia Stevens would not leave things as they were and would take revenge on him. Talking to Jessica wasn't working. She ignored his existence. After one phone call, she said, "I've made up my mind and I'm filing for divorce, but don't let me see you again." Shortly she replied and hung up, not even wondering what her husband wanted to say in response. Emily felt much calmer. Having found a simple job online, even if it didn't pay much, it was better than cleaning houses for the same money and trying to fit in with the close-knit group. "Now watch the babies, you finish up," Ryan would tell her, locking the door to the kitchen to leave her friend in silence. They were doing pretty well living as roommates, but he needed to think about renting his own place so he wouldn't compromise Emily in the eyes of others. "Stay as long as you need to. Take your time," Emily assured him. "It's much easier for me with you and I always have someone to talk to. My circle is thin since I had my baby. I didn't have many girlfriends as it was, and now they have completely different interests. I'm glad you said that. I've gotten used to both you and the babies. It doesn't hurt me as much when I'm fiddling with them. After all, Jessica is carrying my baby in the same town, and I can't be around him. And you guys are like my family," Ryan said. And he didn't just grow attached to Emily. He had deeper feelings for her, but he wasn't in a hurry to admit them to himself or to her. He just enjoyed the time they spent together and Emily's smiles, and he would be around for as long as she would let him, even if they didn't become truly close. By the time Jessica went to the clinic for preservation, Ryan and Emily had fully realized their feelings and were living together as a family. "I can't believe fate brought us together like this." Ryan lay in bed with his lover and stroked her shoulder. "We both used to be so happy before, and then all of our losses. But now we're happy again. And I'm happy about that," Emily said softly so as not to wake the sleeping children. Ryan adored them and considered them his own, spending all his free time with the little ones. It was early morning. Emily headed to the kitchen to brew a strong cup of coffee and walk her lover to work. Ryan was now a master shoemaker himself, renting a small space where he worked alone. The income was not bad, although at first the couple did not hope for it. Oh, and Emily was contributing to the overall budget. "You don't have to work so hard," Ryan consoled her. "I make enough, and you spend time with our kids and don't forget to vacation." "There's nothing wrong with me. I'm a mom." Emily smiled tiredly as she walked him to the front door. Ryan was pretty excited when he found out about Jessica's labor. She had given birth to a healthy baby boy, but they hadn't given him a name, nor was he even allowed to wait in the hallway for his son to be born. He had to coax the secretive clinic staff to tell him at least a little about his baby. "She'll calm down," Emily told him. "She's become a mother after all, and she understands how you feel. Just wait a little while, and you'll be able to see your boy." But months went by, and Jessica didn't respond to his requests to see the baby. Ryan couldn't afford to sue such a family, so he could only watch from afar as Jessica left the house for walks with the stroller. Ryan was glad he wasn't alone. Growing up with 3 kids who didn't call him daddy never let him get bored. "Let's go to the playground," the 3-year-olds coaxed every time he had a day off. "Daddy, please." Lily begged in her thin voice. She had the strongest influence on her parents because she looked like an innocent little angel in front of her fidgety brothers. "Walk, walk," yelled Michael, tugging at his father's pant leg. "Now I'll gather you all up," Emily said with a smile, "and let's go for a walk, or you'll drive Daddy crazy." The neighbors had long since grown accustomed to the modest couple. They became spouses a year after the beginning of their relationship. At the festive dinner invited the closest friends, neighbors who were sincerely happy for their union. Emily and Ryan lived soul to soul, shared with each other all the excitement. They solved problems together and tried never to be discouraged, setting an example for the children with their optimism. From time to time, Ryan's sister from a neighboring town with her family came to visit them. After all, it was easier to do it in their own car. Ryan and Emily, though they didn't need money, but they didn't spend a lot. They did, however, splurge big time. When it came time to pack their little ones for school, "They drive me crazy," Emily complained to Carol Johnson after she redid her homework with her first graders. "I remember fighting with my daughters. It was hard for them to keep still at first, but then they get used to it. The main thing is to stick to the schedule, despite the difficulties," Carol replied. The first school year ended successfully. Sam, Lily, and Michael moved on to second grade with good knowledge and a thirst for learning new things. And over the summer, the couple was able to purchase a comfortable car that Ryan used to drive the children to school in the mornings. "Someday we'll have another baby," he told his wife. And Emily agreed, "Of course we will. But let our little ones grow up a little more, or I'll go crazy." "Absolutely, honey," he agreed one day while waiting for the kids after class before school. Ryan noticed a stubby first grader standing lonely not far from him. The child was clearly not from a well-to-do family, because his uniform was not the newest and neatest. He was eating leftover buns from the cafeteria and seemed to want more. "Hey," Ryan addressed him, "if your parents are running late, I can get you something until they get here. Want some?" The boy nodded silently. When Ryan returned to him a few minutes later with a juicy meat pie, he pounced on it before he could even thank him. Ryan didn't like what he saw. It looked like the kid was clearly starving, and the parents didn't seem to care. "His name is Nick," Ryan told Emily, and she shook her head. "Look after him, buy something tomorrow." "Poor boy, and where does the school look? Don't they know what's going on with their student? If his family situation is as dire as you think it is, they should have sounded the alarm and involved the child welfare authorities a long time ago. He's scared, but I'll try to find out more about his parents," her spouse replied, understanding her outrage. After receiving another treat from his kind uncle's hands, Nick became more talkative. "What's your last name? And where are your parents?" The boy unashamedly gave his mother's last name, and Ryan froze. It was Jessica's last name, after all, and the first name matched. He squatted down in front of Nick and gently took him by the shoulders. "Your mom's name is Jessica?" "Yes. Do you know her?" Nick patted his eyes in surprise, examining the troubled face across from him. "Mom's going through a rough patch. That's what she says. Grandma and Grandpa were in a car accident last year and went to heaven. That's when Mom started drinking. She doesn't even eat, she just goes everywhere with a bottle. She often yelled at the maids, so they quit. And Mom can't cook herself, even though I say I'm hungry." "Oh my God," was all Ryan could say. His own son stood before him. This poor, lonely, and abandoned child was his blood. "Don't worry, buddy," Ryan put his arm around the boy and stroked his back. "Things will change soon, I promise. Now you're going to meet someone and we're going to go visit." Calling Emily, Ryan warned her that he was coming along with Nick. She was as excited about the baby as her husband. While the children, who quickly found common ground, entertained themselves in the only room, the couple locked themselves in the kitchen. "She's out of her mind. You can't drive a child like that," Emily whispered so the little ones couldn't hear anything. "I'll terminate her parental rights." Ryan boiled with anger. "She hid him from me and didn't think she was human. Crazy." "Shh." Emily hugged her spouse from behind and nuzzled her cheek against his. "We'll do whatever we need to do. We'll contact child welfare first, have them come and assess Nick's condition, and then we'll take care of Jessica. He'll definitely stay with us, I'm sure. From what he says, she's not a good mother." However, Natalie Anderson, who arrived at their apartment from child welfare, told Ryan of the big hurdle. There needs to be a DNA to test to establish your parentage to Nick. But it's already clear, the man said indignantly. Jessica was pregnant by me. We conceived a baby boy right before the wedding. Understand you need documentation, not just words. And if you're not the birth father, there may be difficulties in getting the boy into your custody. And first they will find the real father or other blood relatives. Until then, he will live with his mother. It took 2 weeks to wait for the test results. During that time, Ryan became exhausted and made an enemy in Jessica. She stalked him, often drunk, waiting outside his house as he seated Lily, Michael, and Sam in the car before class, and pounced on him with accusations. You're trying to take the last thing from me. Look at what I've become. I'm miserable without Nick. I won't survive. Stop drinking and things will get better, Ryan answered her without pity. You hid your son from me, but I put up with it. I thought you'd take better care of him, and you're just a terrible mom. Dad, is Nick going to live with us? The children asked, interested in Jessica's antics. I hope so. And don't be afraid of that aunt, she won't hurt you. I promise. Emily and Ryan sat in front of the laptop, about to open the file with the DNA test results sent from the lab. Both were visibly shaken, but they supported each other by holding hands. He's not mine, Ryan said quietly. And then it didn't immediately come to him what that meant. Jessica and her family were deceiving him. But why? They were treating him like he was unworthy of respect, and they were always leading him around. He wanted to be a father. He'd been trying to get Nick to meet him for years, and they didn't even tell him the bitter truth. Who are these people? Why did they torture you? Emily asked the burning questions. No, that's not going to stop me. Nick is trusted to us, and I can't leave him to a worthless mother like that. Ryan stood his ground. Do you want to adopt him if the birth parents refuse? I do. Would you be okay with that? He asked his wife hopefully. I don't mind. I can see how attached you are to Nick, and there's plenty of room for everyone. We were planning to buy an apartment with a mortgage. We had not yet used the maternity capital. The guardianship authorities were surprised at the determination of the couple, who had already raised 3 children, to take responsibility for Nick. He did not have his own father. It was not possible to find him. Jessica brought the case to court, not wanting to lose her son. When the judge ruled in favor of Ryan and Emily, she didn't make a scene, but asked to be allowed to say goodbye to her child. I'm sorry, honey. She knelt down in front of Nick and wrapped her palms around his little face. Nick did not answer. Silently, he stared into her eyes and cried. Then Ryan led him away. The boy quickly got used to his new life. In his new family, he didn't cause any problems. His older brothers and sister looked after him and helped him with his lessons. Lily liked to study the most. And the boys got a new brother to build tall towers out of Legos. Ouch. Ryan grabbed the back of his chair from the sharp pain in his lower abdomen. So what's wrong with you? Emily asked worriedly. Started feeling pain lately, but I haven't told you. What kind of pain? It's about your health, Emily said sternly as she helped her husband to the couch and lay down. I'll make you an appointment with the doctor. It's better to find out than to suffer through to serious complications. While the kids were at school, Emily drove Ryan to the clinic. After examining him, the doctor sent him to get tests and undergo a few more procedures. After waiting for the results, the couple drove to the clinic again with a misgiving. I'm afraid I don't have good news for you, the doctor said in a rather calm tone, so as not to scare Ryan too much. You don't just have inflammation, you have a tumor. He picked up a scan from the table and showed it to Ryan. There, you see, but it can be surgically removed. Ryan couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had a tumor. How could that be? He's not even 36 yet. Surgery. Will it definitely get this stuff out of my system? He asked in a low voice. I'm not going to hide it. The surgery isn't easy, but we have excellent specialists working here. They'll do their best. Ryan didn't wait for a straight answer. Of course, there are always many factors that determine the successful outcome of the surgery. Emily struggled to hold back tears. She didn't want to upset her husband more, lest he think he was doomed. That's why we couldn't conceive, her husband told her. It was a wake-up call, and I didn't realize I needed to go get checked. Maybe the situation wasn't that dire back then. It's not dire now, Emily insisted. I mean, we have money. the ones we've been saving for a place to live. And soon a date was set for the surgery. The children didn't want to stay with Carol Johnson. They contacted their mom at the clinic that evening. They behaved calmly. They didn't ask any annoying questions. When are we going to see Daddy? Barely regained consciousness, Ryan was seen by doctors and given a disappointing statement. Unfortunately, the problem is not completely fixed. Surgery is not magic. You'll need expensive treatment and then rehabilitation. Otherwise, the disease will progress. Those were the words Ryan dreaded hearing the most. He was desperate. Emily was crying, no longer hiding her grief. She couldn't lose another loved one. We have nowhere else to get money, he complained to Carol Johnson. We've used up all our savings, borrowed from everyone around us. The bank won't approve a loan for me. I won't be able to make the payments myself. Emily was clutching her head. She was absolutely distraught at her helplessness. Jessica appeared on the doorstep of their new apartment out of the blue. What do you want? Wasting no time to be polite, she asked Ryan's spouse. Can I come in? I'm on business. Come in, the women settled in the kitchen. Emily, out of habit, offered her guest tea and set a treat on the table. And you look much better than you did last time, she remarked, eyeing Jessica. Thank you. I'm glad it's noticeable. I went through alcohol treatment at the clinic and I'm completely clean. Now I don't even care for booze anymore. Did you come to discuss seeing Nick? Do you want to hang out with him? Of course I do. But I'm here to help Ryan. I found out about your trouble, and I can pay all his expenses. Oh my God. Emily covered her face with her hands. She couldn't control her emotions and cried with relief. Surely you can do that for us. We're broke. I don't know where to get the money. I didn't know how to tell Ryan that I wasn't approved for a loan. After all, it was our last hope. Jessica looked sincere. She moved her chair closer and hugged Emily. It'll all be over soon. I'll transfer the right amount of money into the clinic's account today, and Ryan will be started on the right medication as early as tomorrow. Thank you so much. Ryan saved me. Now I'm his. He helped me realize what I had traded my real life for. I was parentless and headlong into my own worries. But I was responsible for a child who needed a parent just as much as I did. And Jessica openly admitted her guilt. If Ryan hadn't taken the case to court back then, I would have gotten my hands on myself, and my child would have been miserable for the rest of his life. You can be proud of yourself, Emily pronounced. You did it. Not every addict manages to quit, and you recognized your mistakes and you made it. Ryan will be happy to see you. You have a lot to talk about. The next day, there was a whole delegation in Ryan's room. The doctor warned the kids not to make too much noise, but allowed them to see their father for support. Hey, Jessica, what a good girl you are. Thank you. Jessica sat smiling along with her ex-husband's family. She could see their smiles and genuine concern for each other. There was harmony and love in this family, all of which she smothered with her own hands. Jessica had believed her mother and let her decide her own fate, and she could be just as happy now. Fortunately, Nick was in contact with her, and Ryan offered to let them see each other if they both wanted to. With the necessary medications in place, Ryan was discharged. 2 weeks later, he was recovered and even raring to go back to work. The kids were excited to have Daddy home and were always there for him. They greedily caught his attention. I'm so glad you're home. Emily kissed him. She snuggled up to her spouse, looking at the kids having fun on the carpet. I was so afraid you'd be gone. Gradually, the pain of the shock she had experienced began to be forgotten. Ryan and Emily's family tried to make each of their days memorable and not complain that they were missing something. Well, Jessica became a frequent guest in their house, and after a while, having found her happiness, invited the whole family to a lavish wedding. The midday heat and the breeze blowing in from the quarried sand pit created a dusty, stuffy veil over the winding ribbon of country road that made his throat sore and his eyes water. So much so that it didn't even help to turn away from the curb where the uncultivated grasses had grown to man-sized proportions. Sneezing, Logan once again berated himself for having been tempted to walk. He would have chosen the bus and would have been in the district center by now, but as it was, he had to walk for at least another hour. Just fine. The guy stopped for a moment, dropped his backpack on the ground and pulled out a bottle of water, greedily gulped it down. He poured the rest of it over his head. That's a little better. Then, throwing the strap of the backpack on the other shoulder, went further. And then, when the road made another detour rounding a birch grove, exclaimed and smiled. Well, how could I have forgotten about it? He had already forgotten about it 100 times in these places, but he had his topographical absent-mindedness here. He could turn off the road and go along the lake. Such a rearrangement of the route added a few kilometers, but every step, of course, should now be easier. Logan was so happy that he even began to hum a cheerful tune of some song under his nose. "Uncle." A child's voice called out to him, and Logan froze. Was he imagining things? He looked around. Didn't he seem to be the only one here? "Uncle, can I ask you a favor?" The voice came again, now even closer, and Logan, before he could remember, half-jokingly and colorfully about all sorts of wild mystical spirits lured by imitation of human speech, saw the owner of this voice. It was a girl of about 7 years old, thin and white all over from the pale skin and a scattering of freckles from the nose and up to the knees to the golden, sun-whitened hair. A little girl in a dress that, judging by its drab appearance, could have once served as a potato sack, emerged from the thicket of reeds. Bare feet slapped on the muddy lake shore. Logan said. "Hello," he said, and swallowed nervously, because it was strange and unsettling to find a child in a deserted place between two villages. "Where are your parents? Where are the adults?" Actually, the young stranger frowned. "I'm big enough to go where I need to go on my own." I see Logan nodded, though of course nothing was clear. "What? What's wrong?" Nothing. The girl looked at him with a look that said, "Are you stupid, uncle? I just need some help. If you can't do it yourself, you have to ask others. That's what my mom taught me. And also, of course, you have to say the important word, please. Please. Uncle, can you make me a boat?" With the last impatient word, he was handed some old sheet of paper, I think, from a drawing album. I think Logan dropped his backpack to the ground and took the sheet. But he didn't make anything from it, instead looking intently at the girl. Something about this seemed strange and wrong to him. "So you're walking alone. Where do you live?" There, and Chernika waved a thin hand in the direction where there was a village with a beautiful berry name. "And why do you ask?" The girl, having knocked a mosquito off her cheek, frowned. "Are you not a bad man? Why do you want to know where I live?" The young creature's suspicion was reasonable, but it came out so amusingly, coupled with the terms of their acquaintance, that Logan grinned. "Don't you think it's dangerous to ask a stranger to make you a ship? Maybe I'm a really bad person?" "Well, that's unlikely," replied the crumb. "You look like someone else. Different. The good one. The smart one." She waved her hands. "Mommy calls them Tele. Intelligentsia?" Logan prompted, and the girl nodded. Actually, she guessed a little. He was indeed a scientist and came from what could be called an intelligent family. And as for the guess, well, Logan himself knew what kind of impression he made. Tall, skinny blonde guy with glasses, often wore plaid shirts. Yeah, that's how nerds are usually portrayed in movies. But he was just being himself, and he was fine with that. As for the opinion of others, first of all, it didn't matter. And secondly, he knew how to make an impression if he had to. Thanks to his grandfather, who did not let him down and in the period of growing up brought up in such a way that sometimes I wanted to howl. "Okay, I'll make you a ship," Logan said, and raised the sheet higher, going to bend it into a simple but quite buoyant figure. And before the sheet had been frayed and possibly soaked in a puddle and then dried underfoot, it was indeed a watercolor, and a pretty one at that. A skillful hand had subtly depicted a forest thicket, over which the moon had risen. It was interesting, the fact that there was an empty space in the middle of the drawing, on which some poem had been written, not with paint, but with an ink pen. The lines were blurred, frayed, one could hardly make out anything. But Logan made it out. One word, 2 words, and a line. Then another. And what he read. His heart skipped a beat, froze, kicked into a frantic rhythm, as if he'd been hit on the head and at the same time in the solar plexus. He felt like he was falling, and at the same time his whole body was petrified. And the thing was, he knew who had written it. He knew who those lines belonged to. And it was impossible, unthinkable, unreal. Because the person who had thought them up had been dead for years, She was dead. His sister, Helene. Where? Where did you get that from? He must have had the look of a madman, Logan thought to himself, because the girl was looking at him frightened. Except right now he couldn't stop. Where did you get that? I don't know. The poor child threw herself at her, shrieking shrilly as he swung around. Don't. Wait, I'm sorry. Calm down. It's okay, I won't hurt you, Logan rambled, but he seemed to be making it worse. I just need to know where you got it from. Who gave it to you? Tell me, I need to know. The poor girl's lips trembled. She retreated back into the rustling reeds and then, with another shriek, she ran, like a mouse scurrying through the thicket. He didn't think about what he was doing, he just rushed after her. But, after a step, his foot caught on some snags and then, barely unhooked, it got caught on the mud, and finally Logan just fell. And somehow he hit his head, unluckily, because when he opened his eyes, he realized that the sun had shifted in the sky, which meant that he'd been out for hours. Just fine, he muttered grimly, struggling to get to his feet, his whole body stiff from his long immobility. He touched his head with his fingers. He didn't seem to be hurt, and probably not even concussed, although of course he should see a doctor now. In addition, his clothes were wet, soaked with the odors of Tina, stained with mud. It was logical to doubt whether they would let him on the bus in such a state at all. But the main thing was that the sheet was here, and it hadn't been blown away. Logan clutched it frantically, smoothed it out, and eagerly read the lines. No, it wasn't a mistake. It had really been written by her Helen. How strange it was to feel the touch of the past, whose doom he had long since resigned himself to. They were brother and sister, and Helene was 10 years younger. He remembered her curly, unruly hair, the color of bitter chocolate, which her mother had tried unsuccessfully to braid. He remembered her sister stomping on the parquet floor. She loved to express her joy by running around the apartment, and she knew how to be happy about everything: a cake, a new dress, a colorful butterfly seen on a walk. Memories of childhood froze in the consciousness of living photographs, brief episodes from the history of one family, which lived happily and peacefully, until everything was crossed out by a car accident. Father, mother, and Ellen. They said the car just skidded on the road it was hailing thickly that day. It smashed through the barrier on the bridge and into the river. He was burying loved ones on the same day. Father, mother, and an empty baby coffin. His sister's body was not found, but journalists and acquaintances were sure that it was impossible to survive. Logan did not go to the orphanage. His grandfather, Greg, stayed with him. The old man, of course, was not easy to raise a boy, but he coped, surrounded with care, practical, and became for his grandson the best friend in the world. Good pension grandfather was a professor, and lively wit helped to live well. Logan received a brilliant home education, and by the end of school, in addition to English, was fluent in French, German, and also knew Greek and Latin, because grandfather was an advocate of a kind of classical education, which was common among the children of the nobility at the beginning of the century. And this approach, it naturally had a certain impact on Logan's entire childhood, so he didn't know what it was like to run around in garages and dabble. Grandpa thought that his grandson was the last thing left of their family and tried to give him the best that he could pass on. And generally speaking, Logan was happy with his adolescence, and he got into the university his grandfather had graduated from without question. And then, Grandpa, unfortunately, wasn't forever. Having buried him 5 years ago, 26-year-old Logan could not come to terms with the departure of the only close person. Only work saved him. He went into it with his head. And when there wasn't enough work, he went to help other people. Yes, grandfather considered charity as one of the main things that every decent person should do. And Logan, true to his principles, helped homeless animals, visited old people in orphanages, donated as much as he could from his income. And in these parts near the village of Blueberry, he found himself, by the way, for the reason of charity he visited an old woman. Her name was Darcy, and she was a former village teacher. She had children and a husband. And then, life in its saddest forms simply happened. Her retired husband passed away. Her children moved away and, having found their own families, stopped visiting their mother. True, Darcy was offered to move to a boarding school, but she stubbornly refused. Afraid of bad conditions, she flatly refused to believe that there were decent institutions. Darcy said she would live where she was born, period. In general, Grandma Darcy was strong in spirit. But in her 75 years, her health was not so good. And so, when the charity organization, where Logan was a volunteer, distributed the wards he got her. "You are a cultured young man," said to him the head of the organization, Tamara. "You will find a common language with her, I have no doubt." And so, as fate would have it, on his way back from Darcy's, Logan decided to change his route. And now he was standing by the lake. The setting sun was blinding him, and in his hands the wind was tearing a leaf. A leaf that logically shouldn't have existed in nature. Logan sighed heavily. What should he do? He decided to go to the bus stop right now. Because tomorrow he had to go to work, and the art gallery wouldn't understand him if he didn't show up for a consultation about those gorgeous green vases. "Kate." "Daughter, what's wrong?" The young woman, wrinkled pain in the leg again, played out, rose and came to her daughter, who all evening sat on the sofa, frowning, playing with teddy toys, a teddy bear and a tiger. "Who hurt her?" Anastasia asked. "No," the girl replied. "Everything. It's okay." "And I know when you are a liar," her mom told her in a mysterious tone. "Your freckles are glowing. Tell me what happened." Katenka sighed, clutched the bear tighter, and told how it was that she went to play with the village children, but they began to shout at her and throw mud. Then she decided to play by herself and went to the lake. "But that's far away. Did you even leave the village?" Her mother grabbed her by the shoulders and gave her a gentle shake. "What did I tell you? You can't do that." "I'm sorry, Mommy," the little girl said in a trembling voice. "I won't do it again." Anastasia sighed heavily. Well, what to do with her daughter? 1,000 times she repeated to her to play in the yard, in the extreme case near the house, but not like this. "Okay, I forgive you this time. But you're not going to upset me again, are you?" "I won't." "And you won't go to the castle?" "Don't go there. It's a bad house." Squinted her eyes and asked Anastasia sternly. "Really?" Kate replied fervently. "I'll never go there again." "That's a good girl," smiled the girl's mother, and then, getting up, went to put tea. It was necessary to have dinner. And for dinner, well, there was one more cutlet and as much pasta as you want. "Mom, don't you eat a cutlet? Here, it's healthy, there's meat." The little girl held out her plate. "Thank you, darling, I've already eaten. I had a cutlet this afternoon." Anastasia lied easily. As she was accustomed to do, she was again giving the best and not at all superfluous pieces to her daughter. "You eat, eat." Also, as easily as lying about her own satiety, Anastasia had learned not to cry in front of her daughter. That's the last thing she needed. Her own life stupid ruined, so yourself and suffer, and the child need a mom smiling, cheerful, kind, and caring. That's the whole story. There was no one else in their little family. Father, that creature, which Anastasia knew for sure would be too good to be called an animal, had thankfully not been around for a long time. But who could say what would happen next? He would be back soon. And so Anastasia dreaded the future. "No, thank you, but I definitely can't." "Yes, it's a shame, of course." "No, it's fine, I'm just taking care of a few things. I'll see you Wednesday." Having rejected the offer to spend the weekend at a country recreation center with kebabs and other summer pleasures of life, Logan ended the conversation with his best friend Vincent and sighed and went to wash his face. It was a strange habit, but his grandfather was right, it was invigorating. It helped to activate his brain 100%. Logan was going to go to the village, find that strange girl, and figure out how she had gotten the drawing with the poem. His smartphone beeped a tune. It was a message that a cab had arrived. "Visiting?" the cab driver asked, glancing at his passenger who was tensely pensive. "You could say that," Logan answered. "I see," he nodded. "In this weather only to visit the city. It's the best time then. I'm often here. It's good when orders are out of town than to breathe in the summer, isn't it?" "You come here often?" Logan suddenly lively. "Well, in this area," explained the cab driver. "There's a cottage community nearby, which means that not everyone has their own transportation. My name is Ben, by the way." "Logan. Do you know who lives in the village of Blueberry? Well, actually, my brother-in-law has a cousin who lives here. In general, a distant relative. It's not a bad village, but there are all sorts of people, of course. You know, Logan began cautiously. Isn't there? And he tried to describe the girl he had met at the lake. What are you interested in? The cabbie squinted. It seemed to me that the child. Logan sighed. He knew from experience that in many situations it was better to tell the truth as much as possible. Anyway, I met her quite far from the village, and he shared that he thought the child was obviously from a dysfunctional family, and since he himself was no stranger to charity, it might be possible to help. So that's Anastasia's daughter, exclaimed the cab driver. They are well known here. Yes, it's a poor family. What do you mean? Logan asked, and the cabbie, clearly satisfied that he wasn't starved for conversation on the road, began to tell the story. It turned out that Anastasia was an orphan. She came to the village about 8 years ago, or rather she was brought by a local resident, Nick. He was a complicated man himself. He drank, served time, was a bully. And then he brought his wife from the city. And it was no secret that Anastasia had sold her apartment with Nick's encouragement. He promised her that with the money they'd renovate the village house and set up a farm, and they'd live. But that money soon disappeared. Nick lost it just like that, lost it in a card game and drank it. But Anastasia stayed with him. And where could she go now, homeless and in an interesting position? They started to live somehow. They had a child, a daughter. We lived badly, very badly. Sometimes, though, about twice a year, Nick tried to get out of his poor state. He quit drinking and tried to go to Darcy Botke. But it all ended in the same way. Nick came back with little left over from Darba Botka, if he got paid at all, even angrier than he was, and went back to the bottle. But 2 years ago, things got worse. The thing was, Anastasia had tried to leave him. It had been a big scandal, and the neighbors had come running. But then Nick announced that they had reconciled. But Anastasia stopped going out for some reason. They hadn't seen her for 3 months. Then she came out. And the neighbors were shocked. Because it turned out that she fell awkwardly, and no one doubted, by the way, that it happened when Nick came at her with his fists. Anyway, Anastasia fell and broke her leg. The fracture was complex, so the doctors did not turn. And when she turned, it was a little too late. And that's how the young woman became lame. And naturally, in such a state, when she became an invalid, she had no prospects to leave and take the child. That's the story, summarized the cab driver. So if you have the opportunity, you should help them by all means. Anastasia is a good woman, and her daughter is just beautiful, and you can't tell that the father is such a frame. It's very picturesque here, said Logan, who was feeling a little creepy about the whole thing. Yeah, I could use these views on a postcard. Ben grinned. It seems like a simple village, Chernica, but it has its own attractions. Take the castle, for instance. Castle? Logan raised an eyebrow. Really? Well, it's just for show, the cab driver waved his hand. But it's a remarkable structure. From here, from the road, you won't see it, and there is no it in Chernica itself. But if you go into the forest, you see it's a wedge. It's there, a couple of kilometers away, so there it is. Some bandit built it in the 90s. Well, that's what people say. The architecture, you know, is remarkable. All those turrets, red brick, lancet windows, all so gloomy. What do you call it? Gothic, Logan said. Oh yeah. I've heard of it, the cabbie nodded. What is it? Are these your local haunted ruins? Logan smiled. No, it's residential, said Ben. He turned the steering wheel deftly to avoid a huge pig lying in the middle of the road, a heavy downpour the day before, and the animal was lounging in a deep puddle. Oh, pig, that's it. No understanding of the rules of behavior on the road, huh? So this. He returned to the main topic. There's an old man who lives in this castle. His name is Dan Galbraith. He used to be a big man. It was his son who built this house, I think. And then his son disappeared. I'm telling you, he was a bandit, and such people don't live long. Anyway, the old man lived alone. His wife is long gone. Loneliness is a terrible thing. He lives alone there. When he goes out for groceries, he goes back to his place. He mumbles something to himself. He used to be an artist selling paintings, a man of art. And there he was. He didn't save the beautiful from lunacy, it turns out. They drove in silence for a few minutes, each one immersed in his own thoughts. "You asked about ghosts," said Ben. "There are ghosts, too, by the way. They say a lot of things about this castle," he said, lowering his voice. "That on some nights you can hear beautiful women singing in the woods. And some people have seen it with their own eyes. How under the moonlight a maiden figure in a white dress, an ancient one, walks on the roof of a house. They say." Ben glanced at Logan. "They say it's the soul of the old man's first love visiting him, and that one day it'll drag him straight to the other side." "You've got a lot of local folklore here," Logan smiled. Naturally, he took the cab driver's story about 10% seriously, but he was glad he'd had this conversation. It helped take his mind off what was coming. Logan asked to pull over at the beginning of the street. He didn't want to drive up to the gate of Anastasia's house and draw attention to himself. After paying, he wished the cabbie good luck and said goodbye. Now came the hard part. He wouldn't be surprised if the lady of the house refused to let him in, or would let him down a vicious dog. There was no dog in the yard, by the way, and it looked as if no animals were kept here. From the wicket gate, one could see the barn from afar, where there was only a void, and the warped door methodically swaying in the wind. "Good afternoon," Logan said when Anastasia came out of the yard to his knocking. "And excuse me, is anyone home?" calls. "Excuse me, I need to talk to you. My name is Logan Turner. You see, He stammered, though he was usually known for his eloquence, which, by the way, had helped him more than once. But now, it was strange, but it was as if he had plunged underwater when he saw her Anastasia. This young woman seemed to him monstrously haggard and lovely at the same time. She was poorly dressed and moved with difficulty, with a limp on her left leg, but she held herself with remarkable dignity, and her slightly slanted, feline green eyes were shrewd and wary. Taking a deep breath, Logan decided once again that the truth was the most reliable route. He said that he was a volunteer for a charitable organization, and that he'd happened to meet Anastasia's daughter on his way back from a ward, and it just so happened that he'd thought that her family might need help. "We're not beggars," Anastasia replied. "We don't need anything, thank you. I can take care of my daughter." It sounded as if the young woman feared more than anything that she would be accused of not being able to take care of her daughter, or even tried to take her child away for it. "Thank you, of course," she added, shivering as she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, though the thermometer was definitely over 25 degrees. It was strange, but she didn't feel a wave of wary apprehension at the sight of the young man, a familiar part of her perception of reality. "Thank you," she repeated, "but we never with any charities." "All right," he nodded. "Don't worry, please. It's not my purpose to intrude," much less she widened her eyes at those words because he seemed to read her mind. "To interfere in any way with you and your daughter's lives, as if you were a bad mother. I understand your concerns, and I can assure you that the choice is yours alone, and if you say so, I will leave now. I'm not taking hidden photos or videos or recording audio right now. Don't worry about that. Our communication is confidential. But I have to ask you one thing." He took a deep breath, as if he was preparing to dive into the water. "And that's the second thing that brought me here." This he unfolded a sheet of paper, carefully kept in the pocket of his clothes since it had been found. "Her daughter. She asked me to make a paper boat out of it, and I'm not bad at boats, but it's very important for me to know where she got it from." Anastasia made a vague sound, a confused, wary hum, and shifted her gaze from Logan to the sheet and back again. "The thing is, this leaf. Anyway, it seems to have something to do with someone important to me." Anastasia, pulling her shawl tighter around her, hummed again, bit her lip, and it was clear from the concentrated look on her face that she was making a decision that would be final. "It's not from my daughter's sketchbook," she said at last. "Kate draws well, but not like this. And not from our books. Come in." She stepped aside. "Daughter Kate, we have guests." Catherine, who sat at the table on a stool, rounded her eyes and it seems could squeal, as then at the lake, but immediately changed her mind. There was a mother, and she said that they have guests. "Did the guests buy a cake?" she blurted out. "Kate, shame on you. You can't do that." "Excuse her," she said guiltily to Logan. "It's all right," he smiled. The child had just reminded him of the commonplace norms of politeness. But unfortunately, I don't have the cake on me right now. Tell me, is your daughter allowed chocolate? He asked quietly, leaning toward Anastasia. Yes, she answered and nearly flinched. But not from the unpleasant sensation. On the contrary, it was so strange, but as he approached, she felt a cloud of peace and warmth and tranquility envelop her. And then the thought, which she realized was totally inappropriate, that this man, he seemed so caring and kind. Then allow me to present young Princess of Meadows and Lakes. With a joking half-bow, Logan took out of his backpack, with which he never parted in the city, and all the trips a box of chocolates. Generally, their charity organization did not accept very expensive material aid, but now he was acting on his own behalf, and so he chose premium candies with natural composition from Magadarcy. Katinka gasped because it was the first time she had seen such beauty up close. I'll put the tea on, Anastasia said. And yet it was very strange. Anastasia was not used to being frank with people, and lately she had felt cut off from the world. But with this young man, it was easy and simple to talk, as if there were none of the bad things that had twisted, confused, and broken her life in recent years. And in about 15 minutes, Logan knew in general terms that mom and daughter lived alone, and dad and husband, he was far away now. An experience combined with natural instinct, and even against the background of the cab driver's story. All this made Logan realize that everything was not easy with this man. Kate seemed to be afraid of him, and Anastasia was not looking forward to him either. The doctors say it's bad, Anastasia said, touching her foot timidly, shyly, shamefully with her fingertips. But there are medical mistakes, aren't there? So I have faith in the best. I'll go for treatment soon, for sure. I have to take care of my daughter. Lev, well, right? The last was said exaggeratedly cheerful, so that it was clear that this young woman did not believe that she would be helped, but was afraid to admit her helplessness. Logan told a little about himself, what he did and everything. And then finally the conversation flowed in the right direction. Honey, where did you get that piece of paper, please? Anastasia asked. I don't remember. Kate looked away, her lower lip hanging out. I just found it. What if Mom doesn't swear? Anastasia stroked her daughter's head. Sweetie, Uncle Logan really needs to know where you got it. It's very important. Why? It's his job, Anastasia composed as she walked. Katinka, sighing, sent another candy into her mouth. She was already covered in chocolate up to her nose. I really found it, the girl said, on the road. A breeze brought it. From the castle, she whispered at the end and glanced apprehensively around. Anastasia sighed convulsively. Honey. Well, what did I say about the castle? No, I'm not scolding you. It's just. So it was lying in a clearing near it. Yes, the wind brought it. Over the fence. The girl went on telling. Mom, it's not my fault. The village boys made me do it. They said I was a coward, and they said they were going to listen to the ghost. And I went too. Because I'm not a coward. I'm already called a bum. An invalid's daughter. But I'm not a coward. Oh, Anastasia hugged her daughter, and that protective gesture of tenderness made Logan's heart ache. Of course you're not a coward. You're my bravest. But, honey, you're a big girl, aren't you? Well, what ghosts? It was there, Kate whispered. It's there. I saw it walking in the garden. Wait, Logan interrupted. That's the second time I've heard that. You see, while I was getting here and he relayed his conversation with the cab driver. They say all sorts of things, Anastasia said thoughtfully. But everyone knows that the old man lives alone. I don't know how he takes care of his garden, but everything seems to be blooming beautifully. But ghosts? Well, you don't believe in that nonsense, do you? No, Logan shook his head. They talked some more. Then Logan said he had to go. And before he left, he ventured to ask her if there was anything he could do to help. There wouldn't be any paperwork to fill out, no need to drive somewhere or talk to other people either. Thank you, but no, Anastasia sighed, but he hesitated. She was clearly hesitating. No, we'll manage. Okay, but take this. He held out his phone number to her. And if you need anything, or just want to talk, call me. Theoretically, he could and should have gone home, but Logan thought that since he was here, It might be a good idea to stop by Darcy's grandmother's house, because her blood pressure had been bad recently, so he should check on her. And by the way, she seemed to have a wobbly window sash. He'd noticed it the last time he'd been here, so it would be a quick fix. The weather was warm, but not sweltering, so it was a relatively easy drive to the next village. And on the way he pondered. Perhaps he had fantasized? Perhaps it was just a similar poem? After all, even novels sometimes, strangers to each other writers write the same, and there is not a drop of plagiarism in it, because the ideas, as they say, hover in the air. Anything is possible. Logan decided he had to meet the mysterious owner of the castle house in the woods and talk to him about it. Ellen in her 5 was unusually gifted and could draw well, at the level of a teenager already drawing with watercolors and colored pencils. Her parents said that she had a huge talent, and she was a little genius. The girl also composed poems, but since she could hardly still write, they were written down for her by adults. His brain had already invented a logical explanation. Surely this man just knew his sister once. Perhaps he had worked at the daycare center Ellen had gone to, or maybe at the art school where his sister was taken. And then years later, the man himself decided to take up art. Yes, such an explanation was quite logical, that this old man was simply inspired years later by what he had seen from the little prodigy. Anything was better than that crazy thoughts about who else could have drawn and written it. Because it was time to recognize and accept his sister was dead. Sighing, Logan threw back his head and walked for a while, looking up at the sky, at the floating clouds, enough of being crazy, of catching illusions. It was time to accept it. Finally, he calmed down. On the way to Darcy's, of course, he had to stop at the magician's shop to buy some food, because it would be unseemly to come to his ward empty-handed. Grandma Darcy Logan called from the fence. The window above the pamilidnik was ajar, the wind fluttering the white tulle curtains, so Darcy must have heard the visitor. She did, so she looked out, splayed her hands because she hadn't expected to see him. Next time he wasn't due until a week later, and then appeared on the porch. Logan. What a surprise. She had lost her teeth long ago, but her smile was warm and charming, and her eyes shone like a young woman's. I thought I'd come by and see you, Logan smiled back. The window, I remember, should be repaired. Well, the old woman nodded. But she was acting a little strange. She didn't call me to the house. As usual, she just stood there. I'm sorry, it's just, I have a guest. A guest? Well, that's good, Logan said, a little surprised because Baba Darcy was known to be an unsociable person. An old acquaintance of mine. Used to work for him, the old woman explained, and she was a talkative person. A colleague from school? No, Darcy waved her hands. Private lessons. I know German and French as well as my subject. I gave lessons to his granddaughter. Granddaughter? Clarified Logan, who had a hound dog's instinct that Darcy's mysterious guest was probably not an ordinary man. Well, like me, he's a bit of a stranger, the old woman said with a guilty look. I see, Logan said. Is this a bad time? No, it's okay. I understand. And I'm not offended at all. Here you go. He handed her a bag of groceries. Then I'd better get going. No, come on. Come in, I won't chase you away. The old woman got worried. Dan was about to leave. You just wait a bit, okay? She asked, and went back inside. Logan leaned against the fence and looked at the flowers. Lush peonies in all shades of pink. He glanced up to see an old man coming down the porch. Yes, it was an old man in the classic sense of the word. He wore a light-colored suit, cloth shoes, new but clearly vintage, as well as a light-colored hat. He had an oaky, snow-white beard and long hair down to the middle of his neck. The old man, glaring back at Logan, quite unpleasantly, by the way, walked down the road. Logan entered the house. He went straight to fixing the window, which was easy. What colorful acquaintances you have, he said, by the way. One look at that grandfather and it seems as if he had traveled to us in a time machine from the 30s. Dan is a truly extraordinary man, and I'm proud to know him, Darcy said. He has given a lot, sacrificed a lot for his vocation. Oh, he's had his share. Darcy's story was a little rambling, but Logan quickly grasped the gist of it. It turned out that when he was young, Dan had been in love with a beautiful actress who had given up her career for him. They dreamed of having a daughter, but unfortunately a son had been born. The doctors said it was dangerous to try again, but they'd tried, believing that their love would be repaid. But the beautiful wife died in the second labor. They couldn't save their daughter either. Dan had to become a single father. He never married again, and he kept women away from him. He always lamented the fact that he had a son. He thought that if he had a daughter, she would be the ideal, his little princess. But his son, he didn't live up to his hopes and became a terrible man, a bandit. And then, when he died too, Dan broke down, withdrew into himself, became a hermit. He only went into town once in a while, or visited her Darcy, an old acquaintance. Wait, Logan frowned. Did he live alone, or did he have a girl? So this is the same Dan who lives in the woods. Well, Darcy's grandmother sobbed softly. My long tongue. I shouldn't have said that. I promised I wouldn't say anything. But you, Logan, you're like a grandson to me. So I had to share. Before you, they came to me. Oh, old age. One of them came to me and kept telling me to sign the house over to her and the power of attorney for my pension. And you're kind, so you're talking, old woman. Babs, Darcy, what are you saying? Don't cry, Logan comforted her, and hastily brewed her favorite soothing tea with chamomile and lime. Finally, Darcy calmed down. Yes, he had a girl, she continued. When was the last time I saw her? 2 or 3 years ago? Lovely girl. Dan said she was a guest of his. I taught her languages, and how she plays music. Piano, violin, harp, Brett. Can you believe it? She sings like a nightingale. He told me later that she left. Well, of course. Yes, she was a nice girl. Only strange. What do you mean, weird? Logan asked. Well, how to explain? The old woman thought, like a little bit out of our world, you know. She was so pure. Naive. She looked at me as if I were a wonder. She asked me how I was living there. I asked her, where is it? And she, well, in general, as if. She was alien to our reality. We didn't talk much. I taught her, that's all. Dan, he's a good man. But he didn't like it when I started talking outside the subject. That's just it. Logan frowned. All the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in his head. Logan, where are you going? Darcy watched confused as he picked up his backpack. I gotta go, Darcy. Thanks. Thanks for the story. Logan dashed down the road out of the village. Darcy said Dan was walking. Given what the cabbie had said about the location of the house in the woods, it looked like he couldn't have gotten very far with the old man's leisurely pace. Logan took off at a run. And actually he was doing it running, but now it was not a measured movement, when on his arm a digital device, counting kilometers, steps and pulse. Now he was just running, so that it was painful to catch his breath. He stopped only when he noticed the figure of the old man ahead. He noticed it, and he ducked, slipped into the tall bushes by the road, hiding behind them. Yes, he could have caught up and talked right now, but for some reason he couldn't explain this reason to himself. He decided to talk to Dan when he reached home. And the old man didn't notice the tail. Here he entered the forest along a barely noticeable path. It seemed to Logan that he would notice him, as the branches broke under his feet and everything rustled. But Dan must have been hard of hearing, as Darcy had said. The old man must have walked for about an hour. And then, the trees parted, revealing a large clearing. On one side of the clearing ran into a low place where a stream, or rather a small rivulet, flowed. And here stood a house. It was small, but it looked majestic. Light stone in different shades, skillful masonry. Yes, this building really looked like a castle. And it was clear from the first glance it was very dilapidated. How had that ornamental tower, for example, not collapsed yet? There were only 2 floors, and on the first floor Logan noticed that all the windows had bars. There was a small garden near the house, and in it you could feel. The work was skillful, and frequent roses were blooming here. The alpine hill was full of hyacinths. There was a green arbor, and under a spreading oak tree swings were swinging. As for the fence, it was a strange combination brick and steel bars. And besides, in some places the fence was in need of repair. The old man stopped at a rusty wrought iron gate, took a large key out of his pocket, and rustled it open. Logan froze, hiding behind some horribly thorny bush. It was now or never. But he hesitated, because he didn't know what to say. For some reason it seemed to him that this grandfather was not as safe as he thought, and was not at all eager to talk openly to strangers. Logan sighed. He must be wrong. I mean, he should talk to Dan, but not like this. Definitely go back to Darcy. Tell her everything, and through her he could meet the mysterious hermit. Logan was about to leave, starting to turn, but the old man, who was about to lock the gate on the other side, suddenly groaned, clutched his heart, and slumped to the sandy path. Logan rushed to him. "Grandfather," he called out, bending down. Check his pulse. Yes, no convulsions, eyes closed. Grabbing the phone, the guy swore there was no connection. But maybe it was the woods. Maybe he should have gone inside, he thought. Of course, it was doubtful that there would be a landline phone there, but at least there should be a first aid kit. He should bring Dan to his senses, give him some medicine, tell him what he was taking, and then run to the village, to the edge of the forest, to call an ambulance. The old man, despite his short stature and thinness, was unusually heavy. Logan's hands trembled as he searched his pockets for keys and unlocked the door of the house. Then, panting with effort, he carried the pensioner inside. The hallway, the door. The living room with the couch. It fit. Having unloaded Dan, Logan looked around. Well, where does he keep the first aid kit? In general, the house looked a little better from the inside than it did from the outside. But it looked as if he'd been through a time machine. Parquet floors, carpeting, massive carved wooden furniture, a huge floor clock, a plush upholstered set, bookshelves, a lamp with a green shade, gold-framed paintings on the walls, a collection of china and a collection of crystal on long shelves, a fireplace, now unlit. "Hey, Dan." Logan leaned over the old man because he groaned and wiggled. "Dan, where's the first aid kit? What kind of medicine do you need? Don't be scared, please. My name is Logan. I want to help you." "Grandpa, who are you? And what are you doing to my grandfather?" A ringing female voice made him flinch and turn around with a jagged movement, and then Logan opened his eyes in shock, because in the doorway, there she stood. A tall maiden no older than 16. Dark curly hair scattered loosely over her shoulders. She was wearing a dress, and it was immediately clear a retro outfit in the fashion of the 20s, perhaps, in her face. Logan recognized it immediately, and yet she was a stranger. He could have sworn she was practically a carbon copy of his mother in her youth. The same nose, gray eyes, cheeks. She looked horrified, confused. She looked at him as if she was seeing something amazing and yet threatening for the first time. Logan, hearing his own voice as a stranger, delicately began to explain that Dan had become ill. It seems with the heart, and he wanted to help. "Wait a minute." The girl rushed to the secretary, rustled in it, and took out a first aid kit, an ancient-looking box. "Here. Heart drops." She named the dosage and poured water from a carafe into a glass. Logan helped to lift up Dan, who was coming to himself and shaking like an aspen leaf. I'll go now. I need to get out of the woods. There's no cell reception here. I'll call an ambulance." The girl frowned, bit her lip, nodded, and sat down on the edge of the couch, took the old man's hand. "I'm with Grandpa. Grandpa? I'm here." Logan felt like he was floating in weightlessness and falling into the abyss at the same time. His thoughts, now, were flitting frantically, looking like stars ready to turn to nothing under the influence of dark matter. He had to ask her. He had to tell her. And only the fact that the old man was still sick, a large shiver began to hit him, forced him to grasp with a willful effort the part of reality that really mattered now. Logan, without another word, rushed out of the house. On his way out of the woods, he fell. He didn't even notice. He flew to the edge of the forest, grabbed his cell phone, got a connection. Now call an ambulance. And then, slowly he went back. "He's asleep," the stranger told him when he entered the house. "His heart hurts," he said. Logan froze in the doorway. He felt strange, as if one wrong move could destroy everything, make the house, the old man and the girl, and at the same time himself, crumble into billions of pieces like a broken kaleidoscope. The girl, meanwhile, rose and approached him with a light, dancing gait. She bowed her head and regarded him. Logan, on the other hand, stared back. Are you human? She blurted out and bounced away, palms pressed to her mouth and a sly look on her face. Yes, Logan nodded. What do you mean? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, but human. The girl shrieked and jumped, as if she'd learned something so important. I knew it. I knew there were more of you. You. No horns, no tail, no claws. Not there either, right? She nodded at his shoes, and Logan, unable to comprehend anything at all, nodded. And your eyes don't glow. And you. Who are you, she asked, reaching out and poking him gently in the shoulder with her finger. My name is Logan, he answered. I'm volunteer. A what? I help people. I work for free for a charity organization. Why, he took in more air to quell the hysteria that was coming on. Who are you? Grandpa's princess. Simply but proudly answered the girl. My name is Amali. Why? Were you leaving? I didn't understand. To call an ambulance. There was no cell phone reception. Telly. What? What is an ambulance and why call it? It's a smartphone. A cell phone, Logan explained, and a very bad suspicion began to creep into his head. An ambulance is a service that heals people. Amelie, tell me, why did you ask me if I'm human? Because Grandpa says that people are gone, only he and I are left, whispered this young girl, and it seemed like a child sharing a terrible secret. But I read the books he hid, and the newspapers. They say there are people. That's true, Logan nodded. Oh, she splashed her hands. Grandpa, why did he say that? Why did he say there were no people left? I don't know. I don't know him very well. You see, I came here to meet him. You did. You came to visit. The girl clapped her hands. Oh, why didn't Grandpa tell me? I would have made a cake. We don't have any guests. Only Grandma Darcy came, but she's a beast. Darcy's an animal? Logan had a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. Well, yes. The squirrel kindly explained. Grandfather said she was kind. Because he pays her in golden nuts. Baba Darcy taught me languages. That used to exist in the world. She was kind. And she always wore a hat. But it's etiquette for a lady to do so. Of course. Grandfather said she'd take her hat off, but she was ashamed of her squirrel ears. And he wouldn't tell me to talk to her about it. I didn't. I was curious, by the way. Amelie stomped her foot in her manner, together with her gestures and other details, but gave away that her behavior had a lot of the behavior of a small child. Logan's heart clenched uneasily. He began to realize that the poor girl seemed to have problems with her head. The old man on the couch groaned again, coming to his senses, and tried to sit up. You, get out. Get out. Dan clearly wanted to yell, but he was whispering. Speech was hard to come by. Logan rushed to him again and started saying that no, he didn't mean any harm. He was only trying to help. He was sorry. I don't need an ambulance, the old man wheezed and grimaced as if in pain and pressed his hand to his heart again. By myself somehow. You have all the signs of a heart attack, Logan said sternly. But you're an adult, of course, and you can decide for yourself. If you want, I'll go and cancel the call. Cancel it. Only. He nodded at Amelie, who had moved to the other end of the room, turned on the gramophone, and began to dance and hum softly, holding the hem of her dress with her fingertips. If you die. Your pupil, I don't know who she is. What will happen to her if you die, have you thought? Dan's expression changed from angry and indignant to frightened and confused. The old man's lips trembled. What have I done, he whispered, lying back down obediently. Oh, Amelie, what have I done? But who are you? And why did you? I saw you at Darcy's house. Why did you follow me? You followed her. My little princess. Why would you say that? A cold sweat ran down Logan's back. Why would I or anyone else come after your Amelie? Because I always knew that one day she'd be taken from me, the old man sighed wistfully. I knew that one day it would all end, but I meant well. A knock on the door distracted him from the conversation. Logan went to open the door, and it was the EMTs. Amelie froze when she heard the voices of strangers. "Oh, I can't. People. More people." She squeaked and rushed out of the living room, ran up the stairs to the second floor. The door slammed. "Who's sick? Your father?" The ambulance doctor asked, peering warily into the corridor. She'd been on many different calls, but this one in a forested area in a strange house that looked like a museum was definitely one of the strangest. "No, a friend of mine," Logan answered. "A heart attack, I think, but it's not acute." "You sound confident," the woman snorted. "Are you a doctor?" "No, I'm a volunteer. I took a first aid course," as he led the doctor into the living room. Logan thought tiredly that everything that was happening to him was out of control, and he felt like a character in a movie scripted by a man with a lot of imagination. The doctor examined Dan, measured his blood pressure. She said that it was necessary to go to the hospital, and even more so, one should not neglect regular checkups, as the old man admitted the last time he had been to the polyclinic was about 10 years ago. But Dan resolutely refused to be hospitalized, saying that it was nothing. He would drink tea with forest herbs and feel better immediately. "You know," the doctor said to Logan before she left, "you should talk to him about how you can't do that. Indeed, all these herbs, harden yourself by pouring cold water, exercise, it's all great. But the achievements of modern medicine should not be neglected." When the door closed behind the doctor and the ambulance left, Logan felt trapped again. During his time as a volunteer, he had met all kinds of people, sometimes very strange. But what was going on in this house was outrageous. That was what his intuition told him. "Young man," the old man called out to him. "Your name is Logan, isn't it?" "Yes," he answered. "Sit down, we need to talk," Dan said, and when Logan sat down, he looked at him carefully. "Up until today, I thought everything was fine. No, I'm not crazy, and I didn't think I was immortal. But I thought I still had time, time to make things right." Logan nodded, though he still didn't understand anything. But he was in no hurry to ask questions. He needed to hear what this man had to say first. He needed to use this as a basis, a framework for what he could ask himself. Otherwise, Logan felt like he was going to go crazy then. And then Dan spoke. He said that the last years of his voluntary recluse had been full of peace and anxiety, which he had kept to himself. Out of fear, because he had nothing to protect himself from it. He had sought solace in the books of the wise philosophers of the past, but they, alas, could offer nothing to ease his mental anguish. But everything changed today, overnight. And when Dan felt ill, he suddenly realized with nightmarish clarity how fragile his life was. "Do you believe in fate, young man? Fate? Karma? Providence?" "I'm afraid I can't answer that question." Neither negative nor positive, Logan admitted. Dan continued. He said that for years he'd been in contact with an extremely small number of people. Darcy, another other person in town that he paid to make necessary purchases, groceries and such. Another necessary person. And I must point out, please, this is important, that these two were not aware of what I had done. They didn't know. They didn't know the truth about Amelie. "The truth," Logan said deftly. "And what did you do?" "No, wait. I didn't tell you why I came here." "That's true," Dan blinked, squinting his eyes. "But I understand that you followed me from Darcy's house and found me at the gate. So you were my accidental savior, and yet it was no accident. So what brought you here?" This Logan pulled a sheet of paper from his pocket and unfolded it. "This. Found it near the gate of your house. And this. The thing is this. A drawing and a poem. A long time ago, something like this came out of my sister's hand. She died a long time ago as a child. And then I saw it and I just wanted to understand how you got it. I thought, maybe you once knew my family, my sister, and you yourself. At your leisure, you did some creative work, reproduced what you had seen, what you had read. You see," Logan paused for a moment, sighed heavily, rubbed his face with his palms, and smiled guiltily. "I think I'm going crazy, because your pupil, I think I've seen her somewhere, and once before, and I'm sorry, I'm talking out of my ass. So it's really fate. Dan said thoughtfully. To think, after all these years. No, young man, you're not the least bit crazy. And you. It's just wonderful that you've come. And believe me, old man, all you need is this. Just listen to what I have to say. And Dan spoke. He was born into an intelligent family. His mother taught literature. His father was a restorer of expensive antiques. Dan's childhood and youth were cloudless. The family lived in a nice apartment, had 2 cars and a country house. Life was abundant. Everything was fine. Dan decided not to deviate from family traditions and decided to study history in order to teach at the university. Wait, Logan exclaimed when the old man said his last name. So these are your works. I have your books at home. Are you interested in history, in the narrow topic of the Viking Age and its influence on the Great Silk Road? Dan raised an eyebrow. I thought you were a volunteer. It's more like my second occupation, Logan answered. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself, and he briefly described his education, his present profession as an art historian, and his grandfather's business of studying the history of the early Middle Ages. So you're capable of understanding me, Dan grinned. To realize how alien the real world can be to people like us, people of history and art. Logan shook his head. He understood what Dan was talking about, but he couldn't accept it 100%. But he was familiar with it, the desire to immerse himself in his work, mostly cutting himself off from the real world with its vanity and problems. It was so salutary and at the same time, as his grandfather had warned him, dangerous, because you could miss something important in real life, not take the main thing from life, forget about the attention you should give to your loved ones. Then came love. Dan continued his story with a sigh. Do you know this wonderful feeling, young man? No, but I have experienced it to the fullest. And I will say this love is a great gift, but it can also hurt, destroy. I was unlucky. I lost the woman I love. Dan repeated what Darcy had said about him earlier. He lost his wife, and then his son went down a crooked path. You know, they say that real crazy people don't admit that they're sick. Dan grinned bitterly. What about when you know you're sick, but you don't want to, can't do anything about it? It's like not going to pull out a rotting tooth. So I'm getting to the point. Will you pour me some water, young man? My throat was dry. Logan handed the old man a glass of water and he continued. Then, shortly after his son's funeral, Dan turned to a secluded lifestyle. At first he just commuted to work to the university, but he stopped socializing with acquaintances, relatives. Then he quit his job, deciding that it was quite possible to live on his pension, as well as savings that remained, plus, if necessary, you could always sell something from his extensive collection of antiques. Dan began to live on his own. It was wonderful, magical. He could escape into books for whole days. But also, he was increasingly visited by thoughts of what could things have turned out differently. What would have happened if his wife hadn't died? What would have happened if she had given birth to a daughter instead of a son? What would have happened if the daughter had lived? Dan began to suffer from insomnia. He would often leave the house and walk for hours at a time, in all kinds of weather. And one day after a storm, he went for a walk to the river. And there on the bank he found a child. It was a little girl, and she was barely alive. Dan brought her to him. At first he wanted, of course, just to warm the little girl up and take her to the doctors, to some rescuers, but then he turned on the TV. The reporter was talking about a car accident that had just happened, which had claimed the lives of 2 adults and one child, whose body was supposedly carried away by the river. Dan realized that it was the same girl. He was shocked. So this little girl had survived the fall from the bridge in the car, had not drowned, and had been found by him. Was it a coincidence or a sign of fate? He looked at her, a lovely child sleeping by the fireplace. The glow of the flames played on her ruddy apple cheeks. Her dark eyelashes fluttered slightly. Dan, getting cold, remembered what the little girl had said to him when she had come to herself for a moment there on the riverbank, and now he began to wake her gently. Sweet girl, my little princess. He smiled at her. Tell me, do you remember anything? No, said the little girl, and looked around the room with a very serious look. And this? Who is this? She asked, pointing her finger at the portrait of Dan's wife. It was a huge painting hanging over the fireplace. Beautiful aunt. Is she the queen? Asked the girl, because Dan's wife was depicted here in an ancient dress, Well, you could say that, Dan answered and stroked the girl's head. That's your mommy, baby girl, and she's dead, and I'm your grandfather. Dan told the story of what had happened before, how he saw it as a sign of fate and decided to keep the girl. He decided that this was a gift from fate, a chance to have the daughter he never had. But Dan also realized that there was one major pitfall in his plan, an obstacle, a threat that could ruin everything. The thing was that he had learned that the girl had family left behind, a grandfather and an older brother, which meant that no one would allow Dan to adopt the little girl. And then, as Dan admitted, he made that fateful decision. Out of fear of losing little Amelie, he named her after his dead wife. And also remembering what the cruel outside world had turned his son into, corrupting, twisting him into a monster, Dan decided that this girl, she must not know the outside world. She must not become another victim of it. And Dan presented her with a new reality, in which by a strange decision he presented his own dead wife as his daughter, and the little girl he had found as his granddaughter. And so Amelie became a recluse. Dan realized that raising a child, a girl alone, is not easy. But the difficulties did not stop him. He bought books about raising children. He spared no money to ensure that the little girl had toys, a dress, and good food all year round. His own education and skills as a teacher allowed him to make sure that she was developing according to the norms of her age and even ahead of her peers. And the fact that she was deprived of communication with her peers and people in general. Yes, Dan understood how bad it was, but he saw it as a forced sacrifice and a reasonable value for Amelie's safety, physical, mental, and moral. Time passed. The girl grew up. Dan admitted that he had been very lucky all these years, because Amelie had never once been really seriously ill, so he had never had to go to the doctors, who would certainly have asked too many questions. They might have guessed something, and yes, that was Dan's main fear, that one day his Amelie would be taken away from him. Also, he was well aware that as she grew older, she would have questions about why she wasn't allowed to go anywhere, about what goes on outside the house. So Dan decided to take action. He began to tell Amelie stories that once there were people in the world, but then a meteorite flew in, a new sun rose in the sky, and everything changed. People disappeared, remained very last, and they are scattered across the continents. And inhabit this world now other creatures, half beasts, half people, who came to our reality from another world. And you cannot, in any case, go out to them, because among them there are many predators, and they can destroy a normal person. And the books that Amelie read, fiction, history, textbooks, from Dan's words, they all described that, disappeared, former reality. And you? Did you think she'd believe all that? Logan asked. What the old man was telling him, he couldn't get his head around, because it was the revelation of a madman, literally a maniac, and a maniac with a sophistication rarely seen. Logan could hardly realize this fact, that in his desire to find a relative and never to lose him, this old man had crossed the line beyond which madness met him, and he dived into it joyfully, dragging the innocent Amelie with him. No, Helene. Yes, now Logan knew for sure that this girl, so kind and naive, whose mind had been ruthlessly destroyed, that she was his sister. I was afraid that she would want to check it out for herself, the old man answered pitifully. So, I didn't bring newspapers to the house. She didn't know the telephone either. And also, I gave her sedatives, antidepressants. What? Logan was ready to strangle him with his own hands. Do you realize what you've done? You made her crazy. You know, we were waiting for her, me and my grandfather, my normal grandfather. Logan jumped up and started pacing around the room. We waited. We never gave up hope that one day she'd be found, that she'd come back to us. We waited for so many years. And my grandfather, as he was dying, he told me that I mustn't lose faith. I must keep on hoping. And now, he was right. Dan smiled at the corners of his lips. Now you know everything. What am I supposed to do with this information? I don't know, Dan sighed. I'm just really afraid that if something happens to me, she's just a kid. She can't survive in the big world. After what you did to her, Logan said snidely. Oh yes, of course. She definitely can't. I want to ask you, Dan whispered, his fingers frantically clutching the blanket that covered him. Have mercy. Don't take Amelia away now. Do you want? Do you want me to leave my sister with you? With a psycho? She's all I have. Dan closed his eyes. But if I'm gone, when that happens, then please, take care of her. And then Dan was silent, and his hand relaxed and slipped down. Dan had never swore profanely in his life. But now he really wanted to do it because the damned old man, who turned out to be a crazy maniac, had lost consciousness again apparently. He had refused hospitalization in vain. What a day this is, Logan exclaimed, instead of the rich palette of other words he wanted to say, and rushed out of the house. A run to the woods, a call. A new call and his pleas to come as soon as possible, to which he was told that of course that's how you go to the sick. And then, when the ambulance arrived and Dan was brought to his senses, then he finally agreed to be taken away. Grandpa. Amelie ran down the stairs and rushed to the stretcher where the old man lay. No, don't take him away. I won't let you. The poor girl was crying. You'll give him to the beasts. Young lady, please don't interfere. One of the doctors tried to talk some sense into her. What animals? We're taking your grandfather to the hospital. Amelie. Dan grabbed his granddaughter's hand. They met eyes. I love you, my girl. I'm sorry. I lied to you. About the world around you. About a lot of things. But now, you have to obey him, he nodded at Logan. Do what he tells you to do, okay? Be good. Oh, my heart hurts. Finally, the sick man was loaded into the ambulance, and it drove down the road out of the forest. Logan stood there at a loss. He realized that now. He had to decide something urgently. He glanced at Emily. The girl was agitated, nervously nibbling her finger. The carriage is strange. The one that took grandfather away, she said. Why are there no horses? Logan sighed. He knew that, as a normal person, he should be happy that his sister had been found after all these years. But he also realized that she was. Unfortunately, she was. Not at all the girl his sister could have been, growing up under normal circumstances. In front of him was an adorable but. It was unclear how normal a creature. And he, definitely, now he had to make a lot of important and difficult decisions immediately. Logan didn't consider himself a weak man. He thought that he was ready for many unpleasant surprises of fate, but right now he was at a complete loss. How was he supposed to react to what had happened? Yes, he had found his sister. But it was also true that right now there was a girl standing right next to him. A girl he didn't know, and she needed serious help. Amelie, he said softly to her. Do you agree to come with me? Where to? She asked. Now she was tearing flowers, dandelions growing by the fence, and looked like she was going to make a wreath out of them. Your grandfather told me to take care of you. And I will. But I can't stay with you here in this house. Because I have to go back to the city. I have a job there. Amelie, do you know what a job is? Do you think I'm stupid? She snorted. And we're going in a horseless carriage. Yes, Logan nodded, thinking that getting the girl out of this place was a lot easier than he'd thought it would be. But beyond that, and beyond that, it was going to be a lot harder. And so it was. While they were waiting for a cab and Amelie was packing her things, Logan called an acquaintance who was a psychiatrist by profession and worked in a private clinic. Logan briefly outlined the situation to him and told him that his sister really needed help. He also explained that, unfortunately, he didn't see any possibility to put the girl with him in the apartment because it was not clear how she would behave in a new, unfamiliar environment. And it is not an option to take her with him every time leaving the apartment, because Amelie has never seen the city, the outside world outside the forest. You're telling me some kind of fiction. Sandro reacted violently. I mean, I believe you, but the case is incredible. Yes, you're right. You cannot put the poor thing with you. But you know, we have here as wards. That is, not the kind in which the violent are kept, of course. But just some clients who are treated for depression, for example, or from obsessive-compulsive disorder in a serious degree. They sometimes prefer to stay with us, because, well, you know, here is a safe space, no worries of the outside world. And the conditions, believe me, as in a 5-star hotel. We have this, and the greenhouse recently built, well, and there is a park. Come on, bring your sister, we'll sort it out. And then Sandro asked if Logan had any of his sister's belongings at home. Of course, he answered. Her toys, her dresses. Grandpa didn't want to throw it all away. At our place, he added, we have the room where Ellen lived. It's still standing like that. Everything's still there. Grandpa and I only cleaned it sometimes. Good, Sandro responded cheerfully. You know, we can try to give your sister back the memory of who she is. Really? Exhaled a shocked Logan. Sandro replied that the chances are there. And even if some of her childhood memories are gone, the contact with the former environment in which she lived, touching old things, all this will help the girl to return back from the madness in which the old man plunged her. And of course this guy must be dealt with, Sandro added gloomily. It's a maniac. He must not go unpunished. Yes, I understand, Logan sighed, who could barely lift the weight of the only concern he had what to do with his sister now. And what would happen to Dan, he was trying not to think any further right now. Logan led his sister out of the woods into the part of the road where there was a sign for both villages. He had marked it as a reference point when ordering a cab. And what was surprising was that the driver was the same man who had driven him last time, Ben. They got in the car drove off. Logan was afraid that his sister would throw something out on the way, but she only sniffed thoughtfully and was very interested in the upholstery of the seat, checking it with her finger. Did you find what you were looking for? Ben asked, looking in the rearview mirror at the passenger and his companion. Yeah, Logan nodded. Naturally, he wasn't going to. He just couldn't tell everything. His sister was there, but he said he'd found the owner of the house and, unfortunately, he was in the hospital. And this Logan struggled to find the right words. His pupil were going into town, but we're very, very tired, he added with pressure. And we don't want to talk about anything. I see Ben had been working in cabs for a long time and knew perfectly well when a customer didn't want to talk. Though here, of course, curiosity was burning. But Ben was tactfully silent. He only looked with interest at the unusual passenger, when she commented in her peculiar, strange manner on everything she saw outside the window. Logan ordered a cab all the way to the gate of the psychological and mental health clinic where Sandro worked. Well, happily ever after, Ben said, and then gently slipped Logan a piece of paper with his cell phone number on it. I realize that I'm poking my nose into my business, but maybe we should call each other, huh? Talk about life. Tell me what's going on over there. How's everything? I will, Logan nodded, taking the note. And now came the hard part. Because, in general, although he and the owner of the clinic and Sandro, who met them, tried to act delicately and gently, but Amelie, when she realized that they came not to her grandfather, but to Logan's friends, at whom she would have to stay for a few days. That poor girl was hysterical, and it was very difficult to calm her down. Logan called the hospital to see how Dan was doing. The doctor replied that the old man was put in the general ward, but unfortunately he is very bad. Prepare for the worst, said the doctors, and Logan understood everything. At work, naturally, they were not thrilled that one of the best employees could not go out again, but Logan simply said that if they didn't like it so much, if they couldn't get into the situation and understand that he had a family emergency, then in that case, why don't they just fire him? The day ended, evening came, night fell on the city. Logan picked up Emily the next morning and told her they were going to visit her grandfather. The girl was thrilled with the news. What do you think? Logan asked Sandro, who had already had a chance to talk to Amelie. The case is difficult, but not hopeless, he replied. Of course, we still have to look at it, but I think that she has a good consciousness, in the sense that she is intelligent. It seems that this maniac took good care of her education in a sense. I think the main task now is to familiarize her with the fact that the real world, it's not fiction. And I want to tell you right away that it will take a long time for her to adapt to it. It will take a long time. And another thing, Sandro added, your sister. Now it will have to do a lot to make her have documents, so that she is no longer considered dead, you know? It will still be necessary to establish kinship by genetic expertise. You said she's 16, right? Well, you're going to get custody, right? Absolutely, Logan nodded. Okay, do you need any help? Why don't I come with you to the hospital? No offense, but who knows how she'll behave in the city and at the hospital. Logan gratefully accepted the help, and the three of them went to the hospital. Danu was conscious, able to speak, and seemed to be thinking clearly. Amelie rushed to him with a joyful cry, fell on her knees at his bedside, and pressed her cheek against the old man's palm. Grandfather. Sweet grandfather. Nightmarish and insanely touching scene at the same time. Do you agree? Whispered Sandro to Logan. Dan meanwhile spoke to Amelie. He asked her to pay attention, because he had something very important to tell her. And he said that now, from this day forward and forever, Amelie should trust Logan because he is her closest, dearest person. He will take care of her. Dan apologized and said that he always and more than anything in the world loved Amelie. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I wanted to keep you safe, and so I hurt you. I lied to you. Grandfather, what are you talking about? The girl asked, confused. I don't understand. You'll understand later, Dan said. He nodded at Logan. He'll explain everything to you. Well, that's it. Go. I need to rest. Logan, stay. Sandro took Amelie out into the corridor. Logan stayed behind. Dan told him that as soon as he felt better, he got his strength back and called his lawyer to the hospital. Yes, despite the fact that Dan led the lifestyle of a hermit and recluse, the means allowed him to have a good lawyer, who in particular helped him to conclude all deals with the sale of antiques. However, the fact that the old man lives not alone, this lawyer knew nothing. And only just yesterday Dan devoted his faithful assistant in the whole story with Amelie. Naturally, he was shocked, but also did not refuse to provide his services further. The lawyer also offered to help him find a lawyer, but Dan declined, saying that it would not be necessary anymore because he would not have much time left. I dream about my son every night, coming for me, waiting for me. And my wife is waiting for me there, the old man said. Dan also told Logan that he had long ago prepared a will, according to which everything the house and antique riches in it, as well as some collection of jewelry. All this goes to his daughter. But she, the poor child, by herself alone, she'll be lost in this world, the old man said with tears in his eyes and clinging to Logan's hand. Help her. I won't leave her, Logan said. She's my sister. And maybe Dan smiled sadly. One day she'll be able to forgive me for everything. And maybe, one day you'll be able to forgive me too. Logan didn't know what to say to that. Forgiveness. To give forgiveness to a man who had behaved like a monster, who had taken his sister away and plunged her into madness on purpose. However, Logan also realized that now, when Dan was on edge, he couldn't be cruel to him. I've already forgiven you, he said, and squeezed the old man's hand lightly in return. You have my forgiveness, and believe me, my sister will remember all the good you've done for her. Logan was at a loss. What should he do? He realized that Dan had committed a crime to lock up his found child, to treat her like this all these years, covering everything with love. But on the other hand, no. Logan realized that he was not able to think more about it right now. After all, right now Dan was lying in the hospital. He was no danger to Elena right now. Ellen. Logan had dedicated a few hours that very day to chatting with the girl. She was really very smart, although her ideas about the world around her were strange. And she was also surprisingly easy to accept the fact that her grandfather had admitted to her that he had lied. She only asked Logan what Grandpa had lied about, and he tried to carefully explain. He was also happy that Amelie liked so far in the clinic, through the efforts of Sandro, who connected to this extraordinary story and the owner of the clinic. The girl lived in a separate room, which was really very similar to home cozy conditions. It turned out that Amelie was very fond of reading. Logan tried to explain to her what a phone, TV, showed her a video on a smartphone. And in general, he expected that she would be shocked, would be delighted, because it's such a fantasy for her usual picture of the world. But Amelie, after a little attention to this, returned to the books and also took up a sketchbook and watercolors. Interesting, but boring. It's not real, that's what she said. And then, Logan suddenly realized that in the midst of all the important things he had been doing, he had forgotten that there were other people who needed his help, Anastasia and little Kate. He decided to go to the village and visit them. You'll take a cab for the whole paycheck. Sandro joked and suggested that tomorrow was his day off and he could take him to the village. And while driving, of course, did not do without talking. "So she is pretty," said with a grin Sandro. "So you like her? Were you even listening to me?" Logan frowned. "I didn't say anything like that." "That's right. You didn't say it directly," he nodded, now with a grin that was not teasing but condescending. "But the way you said it, it speaks volumes, you know." "Can't you be serious?" Logan leaned his head back against the seat with a groan. "I've got a headache." Sandro was a good friend. He knew how to keep his jokes in moderation. And so the rest of the trip was silent. So Logan even managed to take a nap. Where here his friend poked him lightly in the shoulder as the car slowed at the gate. "No one," Logan said disappointedly after a moment, as no one answered their call. "Wait," Sandro said. "I heard something. Come on over here." "Hey, you can't do that." Logan hissed at his friend, who without permission of the absent owners opened the gate and entered the yard. But Sandro confidently stomped toward the house. "Quiet," raised his hand. "Do you hear?" Logan obediently tried to catch any sound. Silence. Although, he heard it. A thin, muffled sound, reminiscent of a trapped animal crying. He knocked on the door and called his name. The strange sound from the other side intensified. "Wait, we have to check." Sandro, going around the house, looked through the window. And after a moment he recoiled, swearing, and then he just took the glass and broke the window. Then, wrapping his hand around the sleeve of his jacket, he ran it inside and unlocked the window sash. And now Logan was totally okay with that action because he saw what was inside the house too. There in the room were both of them, mother and daughter. Little Kate was sitting, crawling into the far corner of the room, under the table. The girl was trembling and seemed so frightened that she could not even cry, let alone call for help, and only made such pitiful sounds. Anastasia was lying next to her on the floor. She was lying on her side, curled up in a ball, as if she wanted to defend herself. And she was unconscious. And her face, hands, everything was in the traces of an unequal fight. The third person in the room was a man, a huge man sprawled on the couch. He had obviously fallen asleep from alcohol. There were bottles lying near him. And right now his mouth opened, and he let out a long, crackling snore. "Anastasia." Sandro rushed to the young woman, checked her pulse. Alive. Logan crouched on the floor and spoke softly to Kate, trying to convey to her that there was nothing to be afraid of and it was safe to come out. Anastasia started to come to her senses, moaning softly, then shrieked, startled. "Anastasia, it's all right. Don't be afraid. Everything will be all right now," Sandro said. Anastasia looked around frantically, then, from the last strength, rushed to her daughter, who decided to finally get out from under the table and hugged her, pressed her against herself and cried, "Help. Please save me. I can't take it anymore." What? Who are you?" A huge man, Nastia's husband, started to wake up. Anastasia, seeing this, cried out in horror and then froze because Sandro, without much conversation, with one powerful blow to the face, sent this guy into unconsciousness. "Not very right, perhaps. But I don't want him to stop us from leaving," said Sandro, losing his knuckles, his hand hurt from such a blow. Acting very gently, carefully, the friends led Anastasia and Katya out of the house. Sandro thoughtfully reminded them that they had to bring the documents with them. The decision was made instantly to take the woman and the child to the apartment with Logan, because they would have nowhere else to go. "Thank you," Anastasia said quietly. "You saved us. We really won't be in your way much longer." "You're not in the way," Logan sighed. "The main thing is not to interfere with your husband," said Sandro. "You're not going to forgive him? You're not thinking of going back to him, are you?" he asked. And when Anastasia shook her head in the negative, he continued, "We'll be there soon. But before we go home, you need to go to the hospital, of course. In the meantime, tell us what happened." And Anastasia spoke. The night before, her husband had come home. He had been fired from another job without paying anything, and he had come back very angry. Anastasia took the risk of talking to him about how things couldn't go on like this, and said she wanted a divorce. Then the man raged at her, reminded her that they were husband and wife, and said that he would teach her obedience, that he would put them both mother and daughter on a leash like unruly dogs, and that they would never leave the house again, not even to go to the yard. He threw himself at his daughter. Then Anastasia, who was trying to protect the little girl, got the brunt of it. Then the husband took to alcohol, after which he fell asleep for a while. Logan listened to the story in steely silence, and it was only by the change in his gaze that he could guess what he was thinking. He was about to say something, but his phone rang. Logan took the call, and for the second time his face changed. "Dan's dead," he said in a low voice. Those had been difficult, eventful days for Logan, days that had turned many ideas about his own life upside down, in which that very life had taken the most bizarre, disturbing, demanding forms. He was the only one who could take care of seeing Dan off in a dignified manner. He had 1,000 things he needed to do urgently in order to get custody of his sister, as well as to ensure that she received full treatment and support from qualified professionals. And then there was Anastasia and Kate. Logan had put them in his apartment as he had planned, for what he thought would be the first time. And though he hadn't planned it, it just so happened that he had told Anastasia about his sister and the recent events surrounding her. "That's terrible. What you've been through," Anastasia responded with genuine sympathy. "But now, everything's all right, isn't it?" "I wish I could believe that," Logan replied. "I do believe that." Theoretically, Anastasia and Kate could have moved into a rented apartment soon. The charity where Logan worked had responded to the story and was willing to help. But he'd refused. And he had a hard time explaining it all to himself, but he was better off that they stayed with him. There was plenty of room in the 4-room apartment. Anastasia was naturally very timid at first and asked permission for every step. But a little later, at some point it became a regular thing she would get up early and cook breakfast for Logan. And though he repeatedly said it wasn't worth the trouble, she would do it. As for little Kate, she, unlike her mother, settled down at the new place much faster. And although in general Katenka was a modest and well-mannered girl, but at the same time she was very curious and asked a lot of questions about everything that surrounded her. For example, she was very interested in all kinds of sea stories related to a large collection of shells, which were collected from all over the world by Logan's great-grandfather. And then it happened, when the divorce proceedings were already in full swing. Logan offered to take Nastia to a good clinic for an examination. She refused, but he talked her into it. And according to the results of the examination, it became known that the young woman's leg can be saved, you just need to operate. "I don't have and won't have that kind of money," said Anastasia. "Don't worry about that," Logan said. But she was against it, saying she couldn't accept it. For her daughter's sake. For Kate's sake, Logan made the strongest argument, and Anastasia had to agree that the baby needed a healthy mom. And even a little later, Nastia's deadbeat ex-husband was stripped of his parental rights. And besides, Logan and Sandro had a serious talk with him, explaining that he should never go near Nastia and her daughter again, otherwise he would be in serious trouble. Logan's sister was still in the clinic. She was having a hard time over the loss of her grandfather. It made it difficult to get the girl back to the real world. But gradually she was getting better, and according to Sandro, very soon Ellen could move in with Logan. As for the inheritance from Dan, it was going to be huge, even by rough estimates, because Dan, as it turned out, collected very rare and expensive antiques. The surgery on Anastasia's leg was successful, and soon the doctors were talking about the fact that she would probably be able to walk normally. "Thank you," Anastasia thanked Logan very often, but this time she was especially excited. "It's all thanks to you. You just saved us." "We've talked about this before," Logan said jokingly. He had been thinking about Nastia a lot lately. It was strange, but at some point he realized that he had gotten used to her. And her daughter, too. And now it was hard for him to imagine that one day, or rather soon, they both might leave him. "Anastasia," Logan said softly to her, "we need to talk." "About what?" the young woman asked excitedly. The conversation took place in the late afternoon. Anastasia stood on the balcony of the apartment and watched the lights of street lamps, the rare glowing windows of houses, the cars driving along the many roads of the city in the early fall night. "About us," Logan said quietly. "About us?" she echoed. "Yes," he said, and continued. He told her about his sudden feelings, about how he'd never felt anything like this before. He also said that all his help, that in no way makes Anastasia his responsibility, and even if she turns down his offer, he's still a friend to her and her daughter. "I certainly should have done it differently," Logan said, looking into Nastia's eyes, which seemed to reflect the stars. "Buy a ring, arrange everything romantically. But I just somehow spontaneously decided everything finally. I want you to be my wife." Anastasia smiled. A single tear rolled from her eyes, no more. And then she threw herself around Logan's neck and hugged him tightly. "I love you," he said. "I love you, too," she whispered back. "Do you think I'll be able to dance at our wedding?" The wedding took place in the spring, in a garden full of blossoming trees. And Anastasia wore not only a beautiful dress, but also high-heeled shoes that she could dance in, just as she had dreamed. And on this day, she and Logan felt the happiest. They were happy, but they didn't know yet what was ahead of them. They didn't know that in a year there would be a new addition to their family. Kate would have a baby brother, who would be named George. They did not know that in 4 years Sandro, who had become a close family friend, would decide to marry Helene, who would give him her consent. Nor did they know that Helene would fully recover her mental health and decide to continue her family's work and become a talented historian, dedicating herself to the theme of ancient Egypt. All this was on the marvelous wedding day, only the future hidden from them. But the fact that in this future and in many other years they would be happy was already clear.